Chapter 1647. All right, Mingdu laughed and moved to the back of the formation. Lao Air raised his shield to protect Mingdu. At the same time, a pair of wings extended from Mingdu's back, and he flew into the air with a flap of his wings. "You going to use this move again?" Seeing Mingdu fly into the air, the Dark Dragon King could not help but let out a cold laugh. The same move could not be used twice against the Saint Seiya. The Dark Dragon King had fallen for Wuji's trick the last time because he did not know that Mingdu had such a shameless equipment like wings. How could he not be on guard this time? Even though flying in the air gave one an absolute advantage, it depended on the situation. Back in Yamatai City, the Black Dragon Guild did not have many players. Most of them were sea fighters who were close combat professions. They were helpless against Chuanjin and his group who could fly in the air. Now, the thousands of people on the street were all from the Dark Alliance. So what if Mingdu could fly? Could he break through the archers' line of defense? Archers, shoot him down. Following the Dark Dragon King's command, the archers on the street raised their longbows and aimed at Mingdu. Shoot! As soon as this command was given, countless arrows flew toward Radiant City like a swarm of locusts. "Huh!" Radiant Doe chuckled and flapped its wings, soaring several meters into the air. Archers were the profession with the longest attack range in Rebirth. Even so, an archer's shooting range was only a few dozen meters. Unless it was a perverted archer like the Death God's left hand, he would not be able to exceed 100 meters. Now that the archers of the Dark Alliance were shooting from below, their shooting range was slightly reduced. Mingdu easily flew out of the archer's shooting range once he flew up. Everyone knew that Mingdu was a despicable person. This lad could have flown higher, but he only flew up a little, just barely out of the archer's shooting range. Seeing that their attacks were just a millimeter away from hitting the sole of Mingdu's foot, the players below cried out. Seeing this, Mingdu did not forget to take off his pants and defecate to mock the people below. The players of the Dark Alliance below were infuriated, and they wanted to swallow him whole, turn him into feces, and feed him to the dogs. Kill this ugly freak. Everyone roared as they once again knocked their arrows and aimed at Mingdu in the sky. Who pushed me? I'll F***CK your mom. However, before they could launch the second wave of attacks, they suddenly heard a commotion behind them. Everyone hurriedly turned their heads and looked back, only to see a group of guards carrying spears, breaking through the formation and rushing towards the tavern. The system guards were famous for being hotheads. Not only were they inflexible, but they were also extremely ruthless. Anyone who was touched by them would either die or be severely injured. The players who were pushed to the side were the lucky ones. The unlucky ones were trampled into white light on the spot. F***CK. What's going on? Seeing the sudden arrival of the guards, the players of the Dark Alliance were dumbfounded. What the F***CK is going on? Could it be that this group of people can command the system guards? How shameless can they be? Of course, this was just everyone's imagination running wild. The city guards were the direct subordinates of the system. Apart from the city lord, no one else had the right to mobilize them. What right did the people from the Quanjun sect have to summon the city guards? Bastard, how dare you use such a method to lure the guards? The Dark Dragon King was a sly old fox after all. He quickly reacted when he saw the guards charging over. Damn it, how is this commanding the guards? He's using himself as bait to lure the guards over. Logically speaking, killing each other in different camps would not increase the PK value. However, Chuanjin was different. They were definitely in the neutral camp. What was neutral? It meant excluding people who were not involved in the war. Other camps could kill players from the neutral camp for no reason, and players from the neutral camp could not kill players from other camps for no reason. Although the players of the Dark Alliance who were killed by Chuanjin were all Japanese, they were now residents of the Heroes Continent, since they were registered in the Heroes Continent. Chuanjin and his group had just killed over 100 people in the bar. 2 of the new large-scale killing skills were thrown by Mingdu. At this moment, Mingdu could be said to have killed many people, and his PK value was close to 100. One could imagine the consequences of daring to kill so brazenly in the city. It was normal for the guards to be sent out to kill him. However, from the looks of it now, it was obvious that Xuanjin had the intention to throw all the PK value at Mingdu. The Dark Dragon King thought that his arrangements were extremely strict, but he did not expect that there would be a loophole, allowing Wuji to take advantage of it. It could not be helped. The Dark Dragon King had not been targeted by Wuji's Muslim style of fighting. Who would have thought that this bastard would dare to throw a bucket of sh*t at the crowd? Uncle Neo did not need to explain how strong the guards were. Other than the almighty beings of the universe like Uncle Neo, I do not recommend anyone to imitate Mingdu's gratification. The guards were caught off guard, and they charged from the streets to Mingdu's feet. The players of the Dark Alliance were cut up like vegetables. They were knocked into a mess by the guards, and there were many casualties. As for the encirclement, a large gap was torn open by the guards. Looking at the players of the Dark Alliance who were falling all over the place and had no time to care about their group, the despicable Xuanjin Hound smiled and shouted from below, "Xiao Ming, fly to the left and right. Ah, do a roll. Old Leaf, fly in a circle. Go to hell." Mingdu rolled his eyes at the group and said, "Quickly call me Grandpa Mingdu, or I will fly to your side. F***CK. The group raised their middle fingers at Mingdu, who was in the sky. While the Xuanjin Hound were messing around, Grandpa Wang Yu and the other two were naturally not idling around. The formation of the Dark Alliance had already been broken apart. This group of scattered players posed no threat to Wang Yu and the other two. 3 rays of light flashed past, and the 3 of them charged into the crowd. Wang Yu was the fastest, charging at the very front. Evildoers Run Wild equipped himself and followed closely behind. Old Wang had added his full power points, but his equipment was average, so he was at the back. The 3 of them were all top-notch experts, especially Wang Yu and Old Wang. No one could match them in terms of skill, and any one of them could be considered a match for tens of thousands of people. The morale of the players of the Dark Alliance had already collapsed. How could they defend against these 3 tigers and wolves? With the guards at the side, as a neutral player, Wang Yu could not kill more than 5 times a day. His subordinates had death quotas, and he could not kill indiscriminately. Thus, the rough work of killing people was left to Old Wang and Evildoers Run Wild, while Wang Yu led the way at the front. Evildoers Run Wild had immense strength, and there was no one who could withstand a single blow from him. Old Wang's large blade was ferocious, fast, and accurate. Those who were hit would die, and those who were touched would die. Chapter 1648. Block them. Block them. The Dark Dragon King had many subordinates, but his own abilities were pitifully low. Seeing the Wang father and son trio charge forward, cutting a bloody path through the tens of thousands of people and charging toward him, the usually calm Dark Dragon King was scared out of his wits, no matter how strong his mental fortitude was. He retreated as he shouted loudly. The Dark Dragon King was indeed a difficult character to deal with. He knew that most of the players in the Dark Alliance would not understand his words. Even if they understood, they would not risk their lives to save him. Thus, he took out his gold coins and ran to scatter them. As players from Unhinder the World, this group of people did not care about anything. They only cared about money. The Black Dragon King scattered gold coins all over the place. Seeing this, the players from Unhindered the World rushed towards the Black Dragon King like fish fighting for food, forming a thick human wall in a matter of minutes. Damn! Seeing this scene, the people of Xuanjin were dumbfounded. As the saying went, strength in numbers was not just a saying. These cannon fodder had displayed such great potential under the influence of money. It had to be said that the Dark Dragon King was not the strongest opponent Xuanjin had ever faced, but he was definitely the most difficult opponent Xuanjin had ever faced. After all, no matter how strong the others were, Wang Yu alone would be able to take them down in minutes. However, the sly Dark Dragon King was able to deal with the Wang father and son trio, as well as Xuanjin and the previous wave of guards. It was obvious how difficult it was to deal with him. No matter how strong Wang Yu and the other two were, there was still a limit. Under the restrictions of the system's attributes, It was reasonable for them to kill 1 or 2 players in an instant. If they could really tear apart this terrifying human wall, the game would have to shut down as soon as possible. With the support of the coin-scattering skill, the Dart Dragon King finally managed to block Wang Yu and the other 2. He then tossed the bag of coins in his hand into the air, turned around, and ran toward the crossroads. Not good. He's going to turn. Seeing this, Wuji's expression could not help but change slightly. Unlike the keyboard and mouse MMORPG of the past, Rebirth was a full simulation game. In a brand new mode, the players were no longer in the perspective of God. Because of this, there was a corner law in Rebirth. Once a player who was being chased made a turn, they would have many ways to escape. They could go to a room, log off, or even change their equipment. In any case, there were endless possibilities, and it created a misunderstanding in the player's thinking. It was commonly known as Schrodinger's Corner. Actually, the reason I said so much was to fill up the number of words. Simply put, as long as you turn a corner, there is a 90% chance that the captured player will escape. The Black Dragon King, this old fox's anti-tracking skills were much stronger than Wuji had imagined. If this old thing squeezed into a corner, there was an 80 to 90% chance of escaping. With this lesson, the Black Dragon King would definitely be more vigilant. It wouldn't be so easy to catch him again in the future. Of course, this kind of human wall was impossible for others to break through, but for Wang Yu, it did not have much of an effect. After all, with Wang Yu's current strength, even if she couldn't instantly kill all the players blocking her path with toppling mountains and overturning seas, she could still scatter them. Only, as a neutral faction player, Wang Yu couldn't kill too many players right now. Otherwise, she'd attract the attention of the guards, and that would be troublesome. Seeing that the Black Dragon King was about to run to the end of the street, Wang Yu calmly leaped up and used Qinggong in midair. His feet tapped the air, and his whole body drew an arc across the human wall. Then he tapped the ground again and flew behind the Black Dragon King. He reached out and grabbed the back of the Black Dragon King's neck. But just as Wang Yu was about to grab the Black Dragon King, his feet suddenly sank, as if something was holding him back, and he could not move even half a step forward. Wang Yu looked down and saw a shadowy hand firmly grabbing his ankle. At this time, Wang Yu suddenly felt a cold wind blowing in front of him. Without looking, Wang Yu subconsciously leaned to the side. 4 sharp darts flew past Wang Yu's chest. Da-da-da-da. After a series of sounds, the dart stabbed into the ground behind Wang Yu. At the same time, a black figure appeared in front of the Black Dragon King. Falcon Dragon, you're here. Seeing the black-clothed player in front of him, the Black Dragon King immediately let out a long sigh of relief. Seeing the black-clothed player, Wang Yu frowned slightly. Although Wang Yu had seen many experts in Rebirth, this was the first time he had encountered a player who could appear within 10 meters of him without him noticing. He did not expect the Black Dragon King to have such an expert among his subordinates. Although the guy called Dragon Falcon had his face covered, the shock in his eyes was obvious. Seeing the dart behind Wang Yu, Dragon Falcon couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. It actually missed again. Wang Yu did not seem to recognize the person in front of him. However, Falcon Dragon and Wang Yu had exchanged blows before. He had thought that Falcon Dragon had underestimated Wang Yu and had been beaten miserably by Wang Yu. After witnessing Wang Yu's ferocity, Falcon Dragon was extremely careful this time. Not only did he use stealth to launch a sneak attack, he even waited until Wang Yu was restrained before attacking. Even so, Wang Yu had easily dodged his attack. It was easy to imagine Falcon Dragon's current mood. There was no time to lament over his opponent's strength. Falcon Dragon waved his hand at the Black Dragon King and said, "Boss, you go first. I'll hold him off here." Saying so, Falcon Dragon formed a hand seal. His left hand pressed down on his right wrist, while his right index finger and middle finger flicked upwards. Bang, 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 bang. A series of explosions rang out as the 4 darts behind Wang Yu exploded into clouds of smoke. Before the smoke could dissipate, masked players in black rushed out of the smoke and appeared behind Wang Yu in an instant. Without hesitation, they pulled out daggers from their pockets and stabbed at Wang Yu's ribs, the back of his heart, the back of his neck, and the back of his head. Seeing the four masked players behind Wang Yu, Falcon Dragon coldly snorted and said, "I refuse to believe that you can dodge this time." Dragon Falcon knew how powerful Wang Yu was. If Wang Yu was in his normal state, Dragon Falcon naturally wouldn't think that Wang Yu wouldn't be able to dodge this attack. However, Wang Yu's leg was currently being held by someone else, and he couldn't move at all. If Wang Yu could still dodge in this state, Dragon Falcon would definitely accept his fate. Falcon Dragon's guess was correct. Wang Yu could not dodge the attack. However, Wang Yu had no intention of dodging either. Chapter 1649. The skill Falcon Dragon had used was called Shadow Clone. There is a huge difference between the stats of a clone and the player itself, not to mention that the opponent was a ferocious person like Wang Yu. After grabbing the dagger, Wang Yu twisted his waist, grabbed the doppelganger, and swung it backwards. The doppelganger was thrown out and accurately hit the other three doppelgangers. Bang! A cloud of smoke rose into the air. The four clones were instantly annihilated. Damn! Seeing that his clones couldn't even withstand a single blow from Wang Yu, Falcon Dragon opened his mouth and spat out a large fireball at Wang Yu. Wang Yu calmly crouched on the ground. With a flip of his hand, his glove transformed into a dagger. With a casual swing, a cold light flashed, and the black hand beneath Wang Yu's feet was sliced in half. At this moment, Wang Yu rolled forward to dodge the Falcon Dragon's fireball. After dodging the attack, Wang Yu didn't remain idle. He rose to his feet, bent his knees, and pushed off the ground. His entire body shot past Falcon Dragon like a cannonball toward the Black Dragon King. However, at this moment, a few more black shadows appeared on the ground and the walls on both sides of the street. 7 or 8 players dressed like Falcon Dragon drilled out of the ground and walls, blocking Wang Yu's path. Seeing these people blocking his way, Wang Yu grew a little impatient. Wang Yu didn't really care about a mere 7 or 8 people, but the Black Dragon King was getting farther and farther away. The strength of these 7 people was clearly on par with Falcon Dragon. Experts of this level weren't any weaker than Shuanjins. Even if they worked together, they still wouldn't be able to defeat Wang Yu. However, it wouldn't be difficult for them to delay Wang Yu until the Black Dragon King reached the corner of the street. Boom! However, just when Wang Yu felt that the situation was troublesome and was about to stop, a black broadsword suddenly flew from behind Wang Yu and arrived in front of Wang Yu. The broadsword cleaved the expert in front of Wang Yu in half, creating an opening in the formation. The speed of the saber was extremely fast. It killed the person in one slash, and only after the corpse fell to the ground did it turn into white light. At the same time, a deep voice came from behind Wang Yu. "You go after them. Leave this to me." Hearing this voice, Wang Yu was immediately reassured. He ignored the people blocking his way, crossed the gap, and once again chased after the Dark Dragon King. Falcon Dragon and the others' objective was to stop Wang Yu. When they saw that Wang Yu didn't stop and continued to force his way forward, they immediately dispersed. However, at this moment, the man with the long blade caught up with them and leaped in front of Falcon Dragon's group. The person blocking the road was more than 2 meters tall, and his back and shoulders were wide enough for an adult to lie down. Standing there, he was like a wall. Wang Yu could already be considered extremely burly in front of Dragon Falcon and the others, but compared to the person in front of him, he paled in comparison. Presumably, everyone could tell that this person was Lao Wang, who had caught up from behind. Lao Wang had a large stature to begin with. With a sweep of the long saber in his hand, he completely blocked the narrow path. Who are you? You dare block our way? Do you want to die?" Falcon Dragon sized up Lao Wang, who was blocking the road, and asked in his rusty Chinese. Falcon Dragon was also a very strong expert. Forget about Wang Yu. Falcon Dragon knew that there was a huge gap between him and Wang Yu, but he couldn't tolerate a random person trying to block his way. What kind of person was Lao Wang? Of course, he wouldn't talk nonsense with a trash who couldn't even speak properly. Instead, he waved the long blade in his hand at Falcon Dragon. The meaning was clear: less nonsense. If you want to die, come at me. How can I give up? Falcon Dragon flew into a rage. He took out his dagger and was about to rush forward, but at this moment, Evildoers Run Wild also caught up. "Dad, how can you run so fast?" Evildoers Run Wild shouted as he ran. It was really hard for him to run so fast with his short legs. "Huh?" Hearing the voice, Dragon Falcon and the others immediately turned their heads, but when they saw the monstrous figure, they were all stunned. Everyone knew that Evildoers Run Wild looked exactly like Wang Yu in the game. If it wasn't for the fact that Xuanjin often hung out with Wang Yu, it would be difficult to tell who was who if they didn't stand next to each other. Falcon Dragon and the others naturally thought that Evildoers Run Wild was Wang Yu. Falcon Dragon was originally worried that Wang Yu would give chase, but when he saw Wang Yu running back, he couldn't help but feel happy. He immediately ordered, "I'll deal with this orc. You guys deal with the other one. Don't let them escape." Ha-he. The men in black nodded after receiving Falcon Dragon's order and charged at Evildoers Run Wild without another word. Falcon Dragon raised his weapon and charged at Old Wong as well. Evildoers Run Wild wasn't someone who wouldn't retaliate. Once he was ready to kill, he suddenly felt the ground beneath his feet sink. A large black hand had grabbed Evildoers Run Wild's ankle. "Huh!" Hung Xing sneered, then abruptly raised his foot, which was caught by Hung Xing Boom. The owner of the black hand was dragged out of the ground by Evildoers Run Wild. Before he could react, Evildoers Run Wild's fist was already at his face. How strong was Evildoers Run Wild? His fist smashed the man's head into smithereens, and he instantly turned into a white light. At that moment, the others had already arrived in front of Evildoers Run Wild. Falcon Dragon and the others were obviously assassins. Evildoers Run Wild's insane stat points were even more terrifying than warriors. If an assassin were to get close to him, it could only be described as a tragic sight. Falcon Dragon, who was fighting against Old Wong, had experienced this firsthand. Old Wong had made a name for himself since he was young, and had experienced hundreds of battles. Fighting was basically his career for the first half of his life. Even though this old man's equipment and level weren't that high, his battle prowess was so high that even Wang Yu couldn't compare to him. Falcon Dragon was naturally no match for him. Old Wong didn't even look at the charging Falcon Dragon. He narrowed his eyes and allowed Falcon Dragon's dagger to stab into his body. At the same time, he grabbed at the air behind him. Bang! Falcon Dragon's attack landed on Old Wong, but didn't deal any damage. Instead, Old Wong dragged a figure out of thin air. That figure was undoubtedly Falcon Dragon. Falcon Dragon's hand, that was holding onto his weapon, was tightly held in Old Wong's hand. Naturally, he panicked and struggled to break free. Old Wong was a ruthless person who didn't speak much. He grabbed Falcon Dragon's hand and pulled him back while his other hand stabbed forward with his large blade, directly piercing through Falcon Dragon's body. The pitiful Falcon Dragon didn't think that he would die in the hands of an uncle like this, and that he would die so easily. Falcon Dragon's death was swift, and Evildoers Run Wild situation wasn't that complicated. With a flash of white light, in less than 30 seconds, Falcon Dragon and his team were wiped out by Old Wong and his father, and were sent back to the resurrection point. Chapter 1650. The Dark Dragon King's abilities were weak. Without a group of subordinates, his battle prowess was basically zero. Now that he had been captured by a group of experts from Xuanjin, there was naturally no way he could escape. Evildoers Run Wild and Lao Wong were efficient in their attacks, sending Falcon Dragon's team back to the revival point in a single round. Wang Yu had just returned to the bar with the Dark Dragon King when Evildoers Run Wild and Yin Lao Air followed closely behind. Wu Ji looked at Evildoers Run Wild who had returned, then looked at the Dark Dragon King that Wang Yu had casually tossed onto the ground. He waved his hand at Yin Lao Air and said, "Second brother, block the door." "All right." Yin Lao Air nodded and placed the shield in his hand horizontally, blocking the entrance of the bar tightly. The players from the Dark Alliance were all blocked outside. After doing all this, Wu Ji said to Evildoers Run Wild, "All right, next will be your feud with him, Old Demon." "Umph." Looking at the Black Dragon King on the ground, rampaging demonic demon, Xiao Chun felt a surge of anger. Evildoers Run Wild had always had a strong personality. Ever since he started playing the game, He had never lost to anyone other than Wang Yu and Lao Wang. To move unhindered with his subordinates, no one would object to calling him the #1 player in the game. Despite being surrounded by so many halos, Rampant was still extremely conceited. However, it was precisely because of this weakling, who stood less than 5 feet tall, that the powerful guild he had single-handedly created had been uprooted in just a single day. Even he himself had nearly fallen victim to Rampant's evil schemes. At that moment, the Dark Dragon King was lying at Evildoers Run Wild's feet. One could imagine how Evildoers Run Wild felt. He wanted to stomp the Dark Dragon King to death 180 times on the spot. Of course, the Black Dragon King was obviously a person who was not afraid of death. They were all merchants, and they paid particular attention to persuading others with reason. Means came first. Although fighting and killing were effective, it would inevitably be disadvantageous. Evildoers Run Wild resisted the urge to stomp the Black Dragon King to death with 1 foot in order to maintain his lofty attitude of making a comeback from the loser. He lowered his head and said coldly, "Just now, you've also said that if you're willing to bet, you're willing to accept your loss. Now, what else do you have to say?" Baosin stood at the side and translated the disdain in Evildoers Run Wild's words to the Black Dragon King. What a pitiful fellow. Fortunately, he didn't know Mandarin. He had to listen to the same disdain twice. Hee. However, the surprising thing was that even though the Black Dragon King was pressed to the ground and watched, he did not look like a loser at all. Hearing Evildoers Run Wild's words, the Black Dragon King sneered and said calmly, "Oh, concede defeat? Do you think you've won? Anyway, the one lying on the ground is not me." Evildoers Run Wild unceremoniously poked at the Black Dragon King's scar. It was indeed a bit embarrassing for an ambitious and ruthless person to be in such a sorry state. However, the Black Dragon King did not care at all and said, "Little brother, we are merchants, not warriors. How can victory or defeat be determined by this? To move unhindered to ransom or to take back the mining area? How dare you say that I've lost so shamelessly?" Contrary to Wang Yu, who was not good with words, Evildoers Run Wild was usually a person with a sharp tongue. However, at this time, after being ridiculed by the Black Dragon King, Evildoers Run Wild's face turned red and he was actually speechless. What the Black Dragon King said was right. Since they were all working in a gaming studio, the final judgment of victory was of course the ownership of interests. If the person with the bigger fist won, the Black Dragon King had no interest in talking nonsense with Evildoers Run Wild. Evildoers Run Wild thought for a moment and said, "You still dare to be so stubborn when you're at death's door. Why don't you look at where you are now? Right now, you're already meat on the chopping board. As long as you give me the contract, I can consider letting you go." "Go." Hee. The Black Dragon King smiled and said, "Why should I go? To move unhindered players to follow you again if you kill me. And you can take back the mining area? Save it. This is a game. If you kill me, I'll only lose some insignificant experience. Even if you lock me up, I can still communicate with my subordinates." Speaking up to this point, the Black Dragon King took a breath and continued, "I thought you were a genius to be able to single-handedly establish the largest guild in the entire game. I didn't expect your methods to be so low and childish. It's really disappointing. It seems like I've overestimated you." F***CK. In the end, he was still a young man in his 20s, full of vigor and vigor. After being ridiculed by the wily old fox, the Black Dragon King, the evildoer, he was so angry that his lungs almost exploded. He raised his hand to crush the Black Dragon King. Seeing this, the Black Dragon King was not afraid at all. Instead, he stretched out his neck and looked like he was going to die a martyr's death. "Little Fei, don't be impulsive." Seeing that Evildoers Run Wild was angry, Wang Yu hurriedly grabbed onto Evildoers Run Wild's wrist. Wuji also said faintly, "This old thing is stirring up your anger. It wasn't easy for us to capture him. If you kill him, won't he escape again?" F***CK. Looking at the Black Dragon King lying on the ground that he could neither kill nor argue with, the frustration in Evildoers Run Wild's heart was indescribable. He could only vent his anger by cursing. At this moment, Chun Xiang came over and pointed at the Black Dragon King. Old thing, don't think that killing you is useless. As long as you are below level 10, the Dark Alliance will cease to exist. Let's see how you can continue to be arrogant then. Is that so? The Black Dragon King smiled and revealed a title, Black Dragon Guild Leader. Chun Xiang was instantly speechless when he revealed the title of Black Dragon King. It was impossible for one person to be the guild leader of two guilds. Since the Black Dragon King still had the title of Black Dragon Guild Leader, it was obvious that this sly old fox was not the guild leader of the Dark Alliance. Seeing Chun Xiang's expression, the Black Dragon King smiled proudly. A fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Ever since I lost to you the last time, I've understood something. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. I didn't think that I wouldn't be able to enter, but an idiot like you is still making no progress. Not only was the sly old fox the Black Dragon King two-faced, his mouth was also very venomous. Chun Xiang was rendered speechless by his words. Damn you! Chun Xiang rolled his eyes at the Black Dragon King, resisting the urge to stab the bastard to death. Bao San, who had been acting as a translator, could not stand it any longer when he saw his brother being humiliated by a Japanese dog. He shook his head and sighed. I think we should just kill him. I don't believe that the contract won't drop. Oh, Wuji raised his eyebrows and said, this old thing is very sly. Do you think he would keep something as important as the contract on him? That's right. To place one's pride, chimed in from the side. Only an idiot would keep the contract on him. To think that you, Bao San, could come up with such a lousy idea. Little friend, watch your words. Evildoers Run Wild's expression darkened when he heard this. He waited for to place one's pride, his face filled with killing intent. Even though there was a reason for this, Evildoers Run Wild had indeed kept the contract on him. Uncle Demon, you're an exception. Chapter 1651. The Dark Dragon King could not help but laugh when he saw how helpless the Chuanjian people were. He mocked Evildoers Run Wild. How is it, young man? Who is lost now? F*CKU. Evildoers Run Wild's heart crumbled when he heard the Dark Dragon King's words. Only now did the evildoer Rampage realize that he had spent so much effort to capture the Black Dragon King, but it was actually useless. This old fart was just a pain in the ass. He was not afraid of death and was not afraid of getting beaten up. He would be angry if he did not kill the Dark Dragon King. Killing the Dark Dragon King would not be of any use, and he would have a reputation for being unscrupulous. He did not expect this *star to be so invulnerable. Oh, you seem very pleased with yourself. The Dark Dragon King's pleased laughter reached everyone's ears. Wuji could not help but knit his brows. Why? The Dark Dragon King knew that the Chuanjian people would not kill him so easily. He could not help but say smugly when he heard Wuji's words, then kill me. Let's see who wins and who loses. Kill you? Wuji let out a cold laugh. Why would I kill you? You know you can't do it? Then let me go. I might spare your lives if I'm in a good mood. The Dark Dragon King was still very pleased with himself. No. Wuji waved his hand and said, I just want you to watch a good show. A good show? What good show? The Dark Dragon King was stunned when he heard that, and asked cautiously. Name to be determined. Wuji rubbed his chin and said, let's call it the destruction of the Dark Alliance for now. With just you guys? The Dark Dragon King once again revealed a disdainful smile when he heard Wuji's words. To move unhindered, the Dark Alliance had not only absorbed all of the original players, but had also recruited many new players. To move unhindered in terms of scale was even greater than before. Although the Quanjun sect was fierce, they only had a dozen or so people. A mere dozen or so people threatened to snatch the mine from the hands of millions of players. Such words were naturally nonsense in the eyes of the Black Dragon King. After all, the mining area was the true territory of the millions of players in the Dark Alliance. They could play tricks and ignore their boss, the Dark Dragon King, but the mining area was something they relied on to survive. It was their bottom line, and they would definitely not ignore it. Of course not. Wuji waved his hand and said, "The game world is huge, and it's not just our two guilds. Have you ever experienced the despair of being targeted by everyone?" "Hey, what do you mean?" The Black Dragon Guild was bewildered. However, before he could react to what was going on, a server-wide announcement sounded in the sky. The server announcement was similar to the system announcement. It could transmit a player's words to every corner of the game world. It was also known as the Super Invincible Megaphone by players. Naturally, the price of such a call was exorbitant, costing 10,000 gold per call. Players who weren't tycoons had to be cautious when using it. 10,000 gold was still worth it. With an explosive sound, Wuji's announcement appeared above everyone's heads. Of course, rather than calling it an announcement, it was more like a post. Since the server announcement did not have a word limit, Wuji's 10,000 gold had to be worth it. In the announcement, not only did Wuji expose the identity of the Dark Alliance's boss, the Black Dragon King, as a Japanese, but also added details of his plot to take over the mines. In the end, Wuji added, "We Chuanjin will start with getting rid of the Japanese pirates. We, Chuanjin, are willing to offer a reward for free. We are willing to reward the guild that captures the mines with 500,000 gold coins. If you are willing to return the mines to their rightful owners, two great master blacksmiths of Chuanjin will be able to forge a piece of equipment for the guild for free." It could be said that Wuji was the best at bewitching the hearts of people. Chinese players and Japanese players had always been at odds with each other. Especially in the game world, this conflict was magnified. After all, in reality, everyone would be sent to the police for brawling, let alone killing someone. Only in the game could they vent their anger without any qualms. Because of this, although the relationship between Chinese players and Chinese players was not that bad, it was common for them to spit on each other. To move unhindered might not have a good reputation, but most people were just there to watch the show. A small portion of people had the ability to take advantage of the situation. However, no matter how bad their reputation was, they still needed someone to compare it to. To move unhindered, everyone had been trying to add insult to injury. However, when they saw Wuji's announcement, the entire server was in an uproar. F***CK, the biggest guild in the server, had been destroyed by the Japanese. What did that mean? In terms of mentality, the local players were not strong enough. Such a big guild had been uprooted in less than a day. In terms of interests, to move unhindered was dead. The Japanese were now in control of the materials for the national server. Letting the Japanese control the materials market was clearly giving money to their enemies. The local players were the most concerned about their reputation and interests. These 2 points had undoubtedly provoked the anger of all the local players. With Wuji's embellishment, everyone was even more furious. In short, it could be summed up in one sentence. Even if I die, I can. But they could not die in the hands of the Japanese. In an instant, most of the players in the game were stirred up by Wuji's announcement. Even the Dark Alliance players could not help but feel conflicted when they saw Wuji's announcement. But there was nothing they could do. To move unhindered was because most of the players in the Dark Alliance were old players. These people had merged their entire guilds under the banner of the Dark Alliance. They did not leave their guilds and wait for 24 hours to rejoin, so their contracts were already in effect. They had just lost money to evildoers run wild, and now they had to pay the Black Dragon King? This was obviously a bit difficult. But a contract was a contract. The Black Dragon King could not do anything about it. He could only grit his teeth and bear with it. Among the angry local players, the biggest guilds in the main cities were the most anxious. The news of the Dark Alliance annexing the reigning world had spread like wildfire, and everyone knew about it. Everyone had witnessed the large guilds snatching the territory of the reigning world. As for how the Dark Alliance's mining area came about, everyone knew. From a certain point of view, the guilds that had snatched the territory of reigning the world and sold it to the Dark Alliance were no different from traders trying to profit from their country's calamity. Snatching something from their own people and selling it to the Japanese in the face of a great enemy was a crime deserving of death. On the other hand, Chuanjin, who had always been scolded as shameless trash, had helped the country to tilt at a critical moment, giving money and effort to drive out the Japanese slaves for free. Chapter 1652. It was fine if they were outshone by others. After all, everyone was on the same level, and it didn't matter who was better. But now that they were outshone by a guild like Xuanjin, the nature of the situation had completely changed. Many large guilds were either disdainful or disgusted when they talked about Xuanjin. After all, good shoes shouldn't step on dog poop. Xuanjin's image had been heavily demonized by these large guilds. But the reality was that the large guilds were profiting from their country's troubles, and Xuanjin had displayed the conscience of a guild in the country at this time. One had to know that Xuanjin was a small guild with less than 20 people. Just these few people had done things that put guilds with tens of thousands of people to shame. In comparison, the image of those large guilds became smaller and smaller in the eyes of the country's players, while Xuanjin's image became bigger and bigger. The people of the country had always been tolerant. What was justice? What was wretchedness? What was a good reputation? No matter what kind of image the Quanjin sect had in the past, or what they had done in the past, now that they had a clear conscience in front of the country, not to mention that those things were just rumors, even if the Quanjin sect had really done a lot of bad things, everyone would immediately forgive them. In most situations, the higher one's position was, the less they cared about their country. These leaders of large guilds were quite disdainful of the angry players. But now that things had come to this, no matter how disdainful they were, they didn't dare to show it. The most important thing for the large guilds in the game was their reputation. Now that the identity of the Dark Alliance had been exposed, the large guilds that had sold the mines to the Dark Alliance were at the heart of the struggle. If they said anything wrong at this time, their own guild might be pinned with a label that they couldn't wash away. Collaborating with the enemy and betraying the country was a label that people would point at behind their backs. The bad reputation of the guild would be spread far and wide, and being scolded by billions of people would be a light punishment. Their decades of work might be destroyed in a day. The most important thing now was to draw a line with the Dark Alliance. What do we do? What do we do? In the office of the Blood Alliance, Blood Red War Flag panicked after seeing Wuji's announcement. Once Wuji's announcement was made, all the guilds that had sold the mines were under suspicion of colluding with foreign countries. Blood Red War Flag felt wronged. All Asians looked the same, and it was not as if there were no dwarves in the local server. Who would have known that the founder of the Dark Alliance was actually a Japanese? If they had known, no one would have sold the mining area. Moreover, Wuji was the one who had planned for his guild to sell the mine. Now that he had become an indirect victim, who was he supposed to reason with? The crime of being a traitor was not something that could be washed clean with money. Why don't we just make an announcement to explain the situation? Seeing Blood Red War Flag's panic, Blood Shura suggested. What a shitty idea. Regarding Scarlet Shura's idea, Scarlet Wind Whisper expressed its most sincere disdain. If you say so, then so be it. If you don't say anything, why should anyone believe you? Wasn't that right? The mines were stolen by the big guilds, and the big guilds were also the ones who sold them cheaply. Yet, in the end, they claimed that they didn't know anything. Even they felt guilty when they said this. How could the players of a national server believe them? It's one thing for you to betray the enemy and betray the country, but you're also blatantly treating us as fools. Do you still want to live in this world? Then what do you think we should do? Blood Red War Flag looked at Scarlet Wind Whisper and asked. If you ask me, Scarlet Wind Whisper thought for a while and said, we don't need to explain. Explaining is the same as covering up. Either we keep quiet and no one will notice us, or we make up for our mistakes. It's not too late to show everyone our sincerity. Make up for my mistakes? Before Blood Red War Flag could react to Scarlet Wind Whisper's words, his friend's list suddenly flashed. Blood Red War Flag quickly opened it and saw a message from Wuji. Old Flag, are you panicking? Damn, isn't that right? Blood Red War Flag was speechless. You still have a mood to laugh at me. What are you talking about? Wuji quickly replied. I'm giving you a chance to make a name for yourself. Through the chat, Blood Red War Flag could feel Wuji's tone. He then said in surprise, Oh, what chance? Hee hee. Wuji laughed. This way, you can guarantee your blood alliances fame and fortune. Is this okay? Seeing Wuji's message, Blood Red War Flag was a little confused. Of course you can, Wuji said. Hurry up, or else the other guilds will get it first. After saying that, there was no more message from Wuji. Only Blood Red War Flag was left looking at the contents of the chat in silence. What's going on? Scarlet Wind Whisper saw that Blood Red War Flag was suddenly silent. There's a message from Wuji, Blood Red War Flag said. He wants me to apologize in front of the local players and promise to recover the mine without compensation. Saying this, Blood Red War Flag was depressed. It's okay to recover the mine without compensation. We don't need those hundreds of thousands of gold coins, but we didn't do anything wrong. Why should we apologize? Boss. Bloody Wind Whisper was speechless. Whether you did anything wrong or not is one thing, but what other people think is another. I think Boss Wuji is giving you another chance. You must grasp it. Bloody Wind Whisper was speechless. In Blood Alliance, Blood Red War Flag listened to Scarlet Wind Whisper's words. Now that Scarlet Wind Whisper had said this, Blood Red War Flag hesitated for a moment before saying, "Okay, let's do that." After saying this, Blood Red War Flag opened the system notice board and pasted an announcement. The content of the announcement was very simple. First, it said that they didn't know that Dark Alliance was a guild created by the Japanese. Then, they deeply repented of their wrongdoings. Finally, they promised that Blood Alliance wouldn't want the 500,000 Shuanjin. They would recover the mine that they sold for free and give an explanation to the people. I've said before that the people are very forgiving. If you're wrong, you're wrong. Don't argue. As long as you have a good attitude and correct your mistakes, everyone will treat you as a role model. Otherwise, why would there be such a saying as a prodigal son turning over a new leaf? After all, no matter if it was in movies, television, or novels, it would never be as touching as a bad person turning over a new leaf. Once Blood Red War Flag's announcement was released, it immediately won the praise of the local players. It was not too late to mend the pen after the sheep was lost. Blood Alliance was able to reflect on themselves and announce that they would recover the mine that they lost. Although they were just cleaning up their own mess, compared to the other guild that were defending themselves, they were the role models of a prodigal son turning over a new leaf. Look at Yu Huicheng. He had 2 guilds like this. The country was lucky, the people were lucky. What were those guilds that didn't know how to repent and instead try to fish themselves out of the market? Chapter 1653. When everyone found out that Yu Huicheng City Lord was the #1 expert in Shuanjin, they were even more amazed. It was no wonder that Yu Huicheng's guild was righteous. It turned out that the City Lord was also from Shuanjin. There was a reason why Yu Huicheng was able to form guilds like Shuanjin and the Blood Alliance. This is King possible. Blood Red War Flag was dumbfounded after receiving a wave of praise for their announcement. The unhappiness they felt from apologizing instantly disappeared. As expected, sometimes an apology was more useful than an explanation. Of course, the effect of Blood Red War Flag's announcement was not just that. To the other guilds, the experts of Blood Red War Flag were a role model. Everyone had snatched the mines and sold them to the Dark Alliance. At that moment, they were facing the same problem. Initially, everyone was helpless. Once Blood Red War Flag's announcement was released, they immediately received a wave of praise. Everyone played guilds and was not a fool. They naturally did not need anyone to remind them what to do. Not long after Blood Red War Flag's announcement was released, the other guilds also put up their announcements. The content of the announcement was the same. They expressed that they were willing to make up for their mistakes by snatching back the mines that they had thrown away for free. As for the 500,000 gold that Shuanjin had offered, no one dared to accept it. After all, they had sold the mines. It was reasonable for them to sell and snatch it back. If they asked for the 500,000 gold coins, their apology just now would not be sincere at all. No one wanted the 500,000 gold coins, but they wanted it for themselves. How shameless could they be? Furthermore, it was only 500,000 gold coins. To the big guilds, it was really not a big deal. The Dark Alliance had just given them 500,000 gold coins in cash and had not had the time to use it yet. Furthermore, the Dark Alliance had forced them to buy and sell. This made the other big guilds rather unhappy. Everyone snatched back their territories as a way to regain their pride. Looking at the announcement after announcement on the public screen, the people of Qianjin and Evildoers Run Wild gave Wu Ji a sincere thumbs up. Even old Wang could not help but exclaim, "Awesome! You're still awesome!" Everyone's exclamation was definitely from the bottom of their hearts. No one had expected Wu Ji's announcement to cause such a huge reaction. The Quanjin sect had not only successfully stirred up conflict between the players of the local server and the Dark Alliance, it had also made the name of the Quanjin sect spread far and wide. It had turned from a notorious small guild into the most responsible and heroic guild in the game. It could be said that it had gained both fame and fortune. Needless to say, this move of Wu Ji's could be called soul-stirring and splendid. After sighing, Wang Yu asked softly, "Wu Ji, if someone asked you for the $500,000, would you give it to them?" "Of course I will." Wu Ji grinned. "Do you have that much money?" "No." Wu Ji spread his hands and said, "The old demon does. He has a large sum of money for breaching the contract. This has nothing to do with us." F***CK. Wang Yu was speechless. As the big guild's announcements were all private announcements, they did not have a built-in translation function like the system announcements. Hence, the Black Dragon King was a loss as he looked at the rows of words in the sky. Even though the Wei Nation also used Chinese, the Black Dragon King could roughly guess the meaning if the number of words was small. However, the Black Dragon King was at a loss when the number of words was large. However, this was only temporary. Soon, the Black Dragon King received news from his subordinates in various places. After seeing the news from his subordinates, the Black Dragon King, who had been arrogant and disregarding the people of Qianjin and Evildoers Run Wild, fell to the ground. No matter how large the Dark Alliance was, it was still a guild. The maximum number of players was only 1 million or so. Furthermore, the big guilds in the various main cities had tens of thousands of people. These large guilds were usually at odds with each other, fighting fiercely against each other. There was no way for them to come together, and a single guild was naturally not as large as the Dark Alliance. However, now that they were facing a national feud under the guidance of public opinion, the large guilds in the 300 main cities had a common goal. The scale of their alliance was much larger than the combined forces of a few Dark Alliances. Not only that, but other than these big guilds, the players of the local server were also involved. There were hundreds of millions of players in the local server, and there were at least 70 to 80 million online at the same time. A mere million people was nothing in front of such a large number of players. What made the Black Dragon King even more depressed was that most of the players in the Dark Alliance were players of the local server. No matter how much they prioritized their own interests, they did not dare to risk being the dogs of the Wei Nation. Faced with the players who were fighting over the mines, the miners of the Dark Alliance remained as bystanders, watching as the mines were taken away without batting an eyelid. Because of this, the task of reclaiming the lost land was completed easily. The big guilds advanced triumphantly, and in less than half an hour, they had reclaimed all the mines. As the mines were lost one by one, the Black Dragon King's face became paler and paler. His eyes were deathly still. One could imagine that the Black Dragon King had spent so much effort and so much money, only to end up in such a state. He must have felt like a dog in his heart. "I can't accept this. You're being unreasonable." After a long silence, the Black Dragon King pointed angrily at Wu Ji and shouted, "I'm going to sue you." In the mind of a merchant like the Black Dragon King, his mines were bought with money, and the miners under him had contracts. Everything was reasonable. However, these big guilds had sold the mines and then snatched them back. It was extremely unreasonable. If he were to sue them in court, these big guilds would be punished by the law. "Don't be silly." Wu Ji sneered and said, "Don't forget, this is a game." "Do you know what a game is? Don't you know that the weak are prey to the strong? In the setting, the mines belong to whoever snatches it. You keep saying that you brought the rules of reality into the game, but you've forgotten the essence of the game. It can be seen that we are not people of the same world, and this world does not belong to you. If you want to sue, then go ahead. If you win, then I lose. Oomph. Hearing Wuji's words, the Black Dragon King's body swayed, and he said with a trembling voice, "Even if you snatch the mines, it's useless. Those miners' contracts are still in my hands. At most, we'll fight to the death and let the other guilds profit from it." "Is that so?" Wuji smiled and pointed at Evildoers Run Wild and said, "Did you forget that this brother just received a large sum of compensation? Well, comes from the sheep's back." As he said that, Wuji snapped his fingers at Evildoers Run Wild. Evildoers Run Wild smiled proudly and also made an announcement. As for the specific content of the announcement, I won't say any nonsense. The general meaning is to move unhindered. The original intention of establishing this place is to let everyone have an environment to earn money. Evildoers Run Wild understands that very well. Chapter 1654. Although Evildoers Run Wild's words were crude, they came from the bottom of his heart and were deeply moving. To move unhindered players felt guilty upon seeing this, especially when they heard that the evildoer Rampage was willing to pay the penalty for leaving the Dark Alliance. The players who had left reigning the world to join the Dark Alliance felt even more ashamed. Why didn't everyone leave the Dark Alliance on the spot after knowing that it was the Japanese's business? It was because of the penalty. To the miners who relied on mining to support their families, the penalty was not a small amount. The server was lacking in everything, but not in people. Even three-legged toads could run all over the place, and two-legged miners were plentiful as well. Everyone did not stay and fight alongside Evildoers Run Wild when Evildoer was at his most difficult. Now that the mines they relied on for survival had been robbed and food was a problem, not only did Evildoers Run Wild not bear grudge, he even repaid evil with good and paid the penalty out of his own pocket. Where else could they find such a benevolent boss? If there was a crack in the mines, these miners would want nothing more than a crawl into it. To move unhindered players, other than the veteran players at the beginning, most of the miners had only heard of Evildoers Run Wild's name. They had not interacted with Evildoers Run Wild before, did not know much about Evildoers Run Wild's character. To move unhindered players did not have a cohesive group and would scatter whenever something happened. Now, Evildoers Run Wild's benevolent and righteous actions made these miners feel the magnanimity of a guild leader. At the same time, they were convinced by Evildoers Run Wild's magnanimity. To move unhindered, Evildoers Run Wild, the person who gave everyone a job and helped them redeem their freedom, would become the faith of everyone. Every single one of the miners here owed Evildoers Run Wild a favor. Although the word faith sounded illusory, to a large organization like a guild, faith was a cohesive force. A cohesive guild would be even more united. To move unhindered, the power of millions of players gathered because of Evildoers Run Wild. One could only imagine how much energy it would have. It may be a blessing in disguise. To move unhindered. If they had not regained what they had lost, Evildoers Run Wild might never have learned their lesson, nor would they have had the chance to win people's hearts. From this, it could be seen that this false alarm was not necessarily a bad thing for Evildoers Run Wild and to move unhindered. As for the Black Dragon King, although he couldn't understand the content of the announcement, he had already guessed what Evildoers Run Wild would do after hearing Wuji's words. The guilds under the Dark Alliance quickly left. The Dark Dragon King's gaze was dull, his heart dead. That's right, to move unhindered, their cohesiveness was not strong, and they could easily fall apart. But wasn't it the same for the Dark Alliance? The Dark Dragon King had only been the leader for 2 hours, and now he was once again a commander without an army. Looking at the pale Dark Dragon King, Wuji raised his eyebrows and asked provocatively, "How is it? Who won now?" The Dark Dragon King did not say a word after hearing that. He had schemed and schemed, expended money and effort, but did not expect the outcome to be like this. It was clear who had won and who had lost. Of course, the Dark Dragon King was not someone who would admit defeat easily. He fell silent for a moment, then quickly consoled himself. At least I did not lose. I still have the penalty for breaching the contract. The penalty for breaching the contract of millions of players was not a small sum. At the very least, it was enough to pay off the loan from selling the mine, and he would still be rich. Hence, in the Dark Dragon King's eyes, he had only earned a little less from the battle this time. It could not be considered failure. To move, unhindered players were the ones who had lost. Is that so? Wuji smiled faintly, then hand over the penalty. Hand it over? The Dark Dragon King was stunned for a moment. Why? Oh. Wuji squinted at the Dark Dragon King and said, "What did Master Wang say just now? A life for a life, a debt to be repaid. You don't think you can just leave after causing so much trouble on our server, right? Compensation. Do you understand?" Oof. The Dark Dragon King snorted coldly and said, "Compensation just because you say so? I don't believe that gold coins will drop after you kill me." Fine. The Dark Dragon King relied on the fact that he was not afraid of death and began to act shamelessly. Hee hee. Wuji was not surprised to see the Dark Dragon King acting shamelessly. The Dark Dragon King was a businessman. There was no reason for him to spit out the money he had earned. It would be surprising if the Dark Dragon King handed over such a large sum of money so readily. Wuji chuckled and said faintly, "Black Boss, do you know where this is? Hero's Continent." "Why?" the Dark Dragon King asked unhappily. "That's right." Wuji grinned and said, "There's only one way to return to Ingzhou Island from Hero's Continent. You know that, right?" "Of course I know," the Dark Dragon King said. "Then, do you know who the owner of this route is?" Wuji asked again. "Owner?" The Dark Dragon King was very smart. As soon as Wuji said that, the Dark Dragon King guessed Wuji's intentions. His expression immediately changed, and he said, "Could it be you?" "Not me." Wuji pointed at Wang Yu and said, "It's this master." After saying that, Wuji did not forget to point at evildoers Run Wild and remind him, "This master and this master are brothers. Whether you can go back or not, it only needs a word from this master." Wuji was definitely not bluffing. As the owner of the route, Wang Yu had absolute authority to control the entry and exit of any player. As long as the target player's name was put on the blacklist, the player would lose the rite of passage. Hearing Wuji's words, the Dark Dragon King could not help but frown. At this time, Wuji said again, a friendly reminder. "The Neon people are detested in the local server. You guys dare to register a guild in our local server. Do you want to be enemies with the players in the local server? Think about it. You're not afraid of death, but are your brothers not afraid of death too? Money is just a worldly possession. Don't tell me a smart person like you doesn't know how to choose." Speaking of the ability to bewitch people, if Wuji said that he was second, no one would dare to say that they were first. With just a few words, even a troublemaker like the Dark Dragon King began to hesitate. Indeed, the Dark Dragon King was not afraid of death because his level was low, but the group of subordinates he brought were all experts. How could they die with him? Now that the Dark Dragon King's identity was exposed, he was detested in the local server. A mere few hundred people could only be described as insignificant in front of hundreds of millions of players. The mining plan had failed, and there was no place for the Dark Dragon King and his group in a local server. Going home was the only way out. Otherwise, they would just be waiting to die. Chapter 1655. The penalty fee for so many people was not a small amount. It was a windfall for anyone. If it was a normal player, they would have logged off without a second thought. Even if they stopped playing, they wouldn't spit out the money. However, the Black Dragon King could not do so. In the system settings, players had loans on them, and their gold coins could not be put up for sale. In other words, the Black Dragon King had a huge amount of money, but it was only game coins. If he wanted to exchange it for RMB, he had to exchange it with someone in cash. The later the game, the more gold coins were produced. The exchange rate between gold coins and RMB would also decrease. Money didn't grow on trees. Even the tycoon players bought gold coins according to the exchange rate. The Black Dragon King had such a large amount of gold coins in his hands. No one would buy it all at once. Even if there was the Black Dragon King would not dare to show his face in public. The only way this old thing could sell gold coins was by putting them up for sale. However, the Black Dragon King's gold coins were all from the system loan. After paying off the loan, what was left was only a small portion. Although this small portion was an astronomical number for normal players, it was not much for the Black Dragon King. After all, the Black Dragon King had a guild with several 100,000 players in the Japanese server. This was a real estate that was only slightly smaller than Unhindered. In other places, it was an unparalleled existence. Naturally, its value was immeasurable. Whether it was money or priceless real estate, a shrewd businessman like the Black Dragon King knew better than anyone else. Even if he was unwilling, the Black Dragon King quickly made a decision. After hesitating for a moment, the arrogant Black Dragon King finally gave up and sighed helplessly. "Fine, I lose. I'll give you the money, but you have to ensure that we return home safely." The Black Dragon King had no other choice. He was in despair. He could not win, and someone had dug a hole for him. What else could he do but admit defeat? The Black Dragon King's only wish was to return home safely. "No problem," Wuji said calmly. "Although the Chinese players are vengeful, they are more forgiving than you think. As long as you hand over the mine and disband the guild, no one will care about you." "Is that so?" The Black Dragon King was doubtful. "They won't hunt me down." "Don't worry," Wuji smiled and said. "As long as I don't say it, no one will know your names." The Black Dragon King was speechless again. The meaning behind Wuji's words was clearly a threat to the Black Dragon King. "As long as you don't behave, I'll announce your name to the world." After fighting with Wuji so many times, the Black Dragon King had a considerable understanding of Wuji. He knew that this kid was extremely sinister. With Wuji's character, he would definitely not have any psychological burden doing this kind of thing. When one was under someone else's roof, one had no choice but to lower one's head. Moreover, the Black Dragon King was under the roof of his enemy. Left with no choice, the Black Dragon King painfully handed all the liquidated damages in his hand to Wang Yu, who was next to Wuji. The Black Dragon King was so smart that he naturally knew who to give the money to in order to leave safely. Watching Wang Yu take away the jewel chest, the Black Dragon King's heart was broken. He could finally see that he did nothing else after coming to the national server, but became the god of wealth. Passing by, the world's largest guild was thrown away after 2 hours in his hands. The liquidated damages were even more pitiful. It was wiped out before it could even warm up. What the hell? Why did he come all the way here? To be a transport leader? The Black Dragon King wanted to cry, but had no tears. Just as Wuji expected, the players on the national server were very tolerant. Now that the mine had been snatched back and the Dark Alliance had also announced its disbandment, the players did not beat up this group of Japanese who were in a sorry state and whose names were unknown. After receiving the gold coins from the Black Dragon King, Wang Yu also released his authority. The Black Dragon King listlessly led his subordinates home. After the Black Dragon King left, Wang Yu subconsciously opened the jewel chest and looked at the value of the gold coins. F***CK. Seeing the string of zeros behind the value of the gold coins, even a calm expert like Wang Yu could not help but shout. 200 million gold coins. 200 million. Damn it, this group of people from Xuanzhen are considered the richest people in the game, but the largest value they have ever had was only in the millions. The combined assets of the dozen or so people from Xuanzhen were only in the tens of millions. To think that there were 200 million gold coins in this jewel chest. So the liquidated damages of this group of mining players were 20,000 gold coins. It was no wonder that these people did not withdraw from the Dark Alliance a second time after knowing that it was established by the Japanese. 20,000 gold coins converted to almost 200,000 RMB was their hard-earned money for over 2 months. If the mine had not been snatched away, these mining players would not have withdrawn so easily. What's the matter? Is there a divine weapon in there? What's the fuss? Seeing Wang Yu in this state, the people from Xuanzhen could not help but crowd around and stretch their necks to look into the jewel chest curiously. However, the jewel chest was in Wang Yu's hands, and the others could not see what was inside. "It's money," Wang Yu composed himself and said. F***CK. Have you never seen money before? The group looked at him in disdain. 200 million. Before the people from Xuanzhen could finish their words, Wang Yu added. Then, Wang Yu activated his authority. Sigma mouth. What? Seeing the number of gold coins in the jewel chest, the people from Xuanzhen were dumbfounded. To place one's pride in Mingdu, the two good-for-nothings were even drooling. Chun Xiang was so shocked that he muttered to himself, 200 million? We're going to be rich. Even Wu Ji could not help but reveal a shocked expression when he saw the number of gold coins. At the same time, Wu Ji felt a sense of admiration for the Black Dragon King. 200 million gold coins was taken out just like that. An average gaming geek would not have such courage. This old fox was really someone who could do great things. Look at all of you who have never seen the world. When evildoers run wild saw that a mere 200 million gold coins, I feel like my ego is inflating as well, could scare the people from Xuanzhen so much, he could not help but roll his eyes. Have you ever seen 200 million gold coins? When the idiot to place one's pride heard this, he retorted in disdain without even thinking about it. When they heard to place one's pride's words, the people from Xuanzhen cast a glance at a place one's pride and quickly took a few steps back. To place one's pride had a look of disdain on their faces. Damn it, am I wrong? To place one's pride flew into a rage. My friend, evildoers run wild, said earnestly. In a sense, this 200 million is what I gave to the Black Dragon King, and the Black Dragon King gave it to my brother. Tell me, have I ever seen 200 million gold coins before? To place one's pride's face turned red, and he quietly retreated to the side. Chapter 1656. TSK. As soon as evildoers run wild said that, the Xuanzhen people couldn't help but sigh. Look at how the boss is. He's always thinking about his brothers in the guild. Wu Ji, old dog, don't you have anything to say? Who do these 200 million gold coins belong to? Wu Ji rubbed his chin and asked evildoers run wild. Yours. Evildoers run wild waved his hand casually. It seemed that this god of fortune was indeed not interested in these gold coins. Wrong. Wu Ji corrected him. These bastards said that I'm not thinking about them. Now, I announce that these 200 million gold coins will be split between me and Old Cow. F***CK. Hearing Wu Ji's words, the Xuanzhen dogs jumped up. To place one's pride, and the other elders pointed at the others and shouted in unison, Grandpa Wu Ji, even if you don't think about your brothers, you have to think about your grandson. Speaking up to this point, these beasts even pointed at themselves. F***CK. Seeing this group of shameless fellows, the rest of the Xuanzhen people broke down. Wang Yu also shook his head speechlessly. They could be obscene if they were rich, and they could be subdued if they were mighty. This was the basic behavior of these guys in Xuanzhen. After all, they were newbies. Compared to these old dogs in Xuanzhen, they still had a limit. Big Brother Wu Ji. Just as the Xuanzhen people were making a ruckus, evildoers run wild frowned and said, I can give you the money, but you have to get the mine back. To move unhindered, the mine was the foundation of the guild. Without the mine, there would be no income. No matter how much the millions of brothers under evildoers run wild believe in evildoers run wild, it would be a waste if they didn't have the mine. Evildoers run wild couldn't possibly lead so many people to starve. As for snatching back the mines, the thought had crossed evildoers run wild's mind. However, evildoers run wild had personally witnessed the strength of the various large guilds when it came to snatching mines. To move unhindered was unlikely to win in an all-out war. To move unhindered, evildoers run wild had just experienced a disaster. It was unrealistic to snatch back the mines they had lost as soon as possible. If possible, evildoers run wild hoped to resolve the matter peacefully. Even if they had to spend a little more money, it would be fine. Don't worry. Wu Ji patted evildoers run wild's shoulder and comforted him. These guys will never be united. You don't want to use force, but they're more afraid of trouble. Besides, I've promised to forge equipment for them. Let's wait. It won't be long before they send the mine back. As expected, just as Wu Ji finished speaking, he received a message from his friends list. It wasn't anyone else but Blood Red War Flag. Blood Red War Flag supported Xuanzhen in this operation and received special care from Wuji. So when Xuanzhen got rich, Blood Red War Flag also benefited a lot. As an old friend of Xuanzhen, Blood Red War Flag naturally knew the temper of Xuanzhen. Blood Alliance had Unhindered's mind in their hands and was currently fretting over how to deal with it. After all, this was once the lifeblood of Unhindered. Anyone would be terrified if they held the lifeblood of the #1 guild in their hands. Hearing that they could exchange the mines for a chance to forge equipment, Blood Red War Flag contacted Wuji the moment they snatched back the mines. Grandmaster Blacksmith Puppet. That was a class that could break through the bottleneck of a profession and forge godly equipment. Godly equipment was the hardest equipment to obtain in the game. The game had been open for more than half a year, and there were hundreds of millions of players online. However, there were less than 100 godly equipment that had been announced to the world. Most of them were in the hands of professional players and paid players. Even a top guild like Blood Red War Flag was thirsty for godly equipment. Boss Wuji, are you there? Blood Red War Flag's message was filled with an urgent tone. Yeah, why? Wuji asked, even though he already knew the answer. Forging equipment. Blood Red War Flag said, the mines are useless in my hands, so I'm willing to return them. To move unhindered. Do you have a blueprint? Wuji asked calmly. Blueprint? Blood Red War Flag was stunned. Do you need a blueprint? It's so new, Wuji replied. Do you know how much a blueprint is worth now? Forging equipment with a blueprint? Do you think we can afford it? Blood Red War Flag was speechless. Indeed, in terms of value, epic equipment blueprints were worth millions on the market. At this point, many people would ask, epic equipment was only worth a few $100,000. How could a blueprint be worth millions? Wasn't this putting the cart before the horse? Obviously not, because epic equipment blueprints weren't only reflected in the equipment's value. Because there were very few Grandmaster blacksmiths at this stage, many high-level blacksmiths needed epic equipment blueprints to break through. Once they broke through this limit, epic equipment could be mass-produced. Therefore, the value of epic equipment blueprints at this stage of the game could be imagined. Not every blacksmith was as lucky as Wang Yu, and not every blacksmith was as skilled as Chopper 345. With Rebirth's current breakthrough rate, the demand for epic equipment blueprints wouldn't be small. Blueprints were already rare and precious items, and now they were important consumables. It wasn't surprising that they could be sold for millions of gold. From this, one could see the advantage of big guilds. With the support of a guild, millions of gold was just a number. As for those normal players, they could only rely on their luck. As one of the top guilds in the country, the Blood Alliance wasn't like the Complete Reality sect, which only had 2 or 3 members. These large guilds had many people, so it wasn't too difficult for them to get their hands on an epic equipment recipe. Blood Red War Flag thought for a while and said, I can bring the blueprint, but where can I find you guys? Wait a bit. We'll be right there, Yu Huicheng. Wuji casually replied and closed the chat box. With a flash of blue light, Xuanzhen, evildoers run wild, and Old Wang appeared at the teleportation point at Xuanzhen's base. Give it to me. After returning to the base, Wang Yu stretched out his hand towards Old Wang. What is it? Lao Wang pretended that nothing had happened and looked around, as if Wang Yu was talking to someone else. Wang Yu saw this and was speechless. Why were older people so uncultured? A mask. I know you took it. Wang Yu said, Hee hee, look at how stingy you are. It's just a rag, I don't want it. I'm a decent person. Old Wang laughed and took out a rag and threw it to Wang Yu. Tisk. Wang Yu took the mask and carefully looked at its attributes. She curled her lips and put it away. Wang Yu didn't believe Old Wang's words at all. A decent person would steal from his own son? When did you find out that I took it? After returning Wang Yu's item to Wang Yu, Old Wang asked in confusion. I found out when I wanted to use it, but couldn't find it. Wang Yu said, You're a beast man from the Dark faction. You started a massacre in Dark Moon City, and the guards didn't catch you. If you didn't take it, did someone else? I didn't expect a grandmaster of combat like you to learn assassins' stealing skills. Old Wang laughed and said, "This is called nimble hands. It's a skill I created. If you want to learn, I can teach you." Chapter 1657. Forget it. Wang Yu waved his hand and said, "I know how to rob. This kind of petty thievery is not suitable for me." Hearing the conversation between Wang Yu and Wang Yu, the others were speechless. Good heavens, one thievery and the other robbing. These two were not ordinary people. TSK? Old Wang could not help but pout at Wang Yu's choice of words. "I hate robbers like you the most. You have no skills at all. I'm leaving. Don't look for me if there's nothing, and don't look for me if there's something." After giving Wang Yu a disdainful look, Old Wang called out to the rest of Chuanjin and stepped into the teleportation portal. With a flash of white light, he disappeared from everyone's sight. He came in a hurry and left in a hurry. The world was big, and Old Wang was indeed a man who moved like the wind. Seeing Old Wang leave, to place one's pride, seemed to have thought of something and shouted anxiously, "Uncle Nyo, that skill is a grandmaster of combat skill, right? If you don't want to learn it, I'll learn it." "Learn it?" Wang Yu glanced at a place one's pride and said, "Do you think that his skill can be learned easily?" To place one's pride heard this and immediately shut his mouth. No one knew their father better than their son. Out of everyone present, no one understood Wang Yu better than Wang Yu. Learning a skill in the game did not take up much time, so why did Wang Yu choose not to learn it? It must be because learning Old Wang's skill was not free. To place one's pride did not know how much it would cost, but to place one's pride knew that Wang Yu was not a stingy person. If even he did not dare to learn it, the price would definitely not be low. Wang Yu was Old Wang's biological son, so it was impossible for others to have more influence than Wang Yu. After all, the skill's name suggested that it was a very powerful skill. Otherwise, it would not have been possible to steal from Wang Yu without being discovered. There was no free lunch, dinner, or supper in this world. To place one's pride would not be able to learn it for free. Just as Lao Wang left, the transmission array released a dazzling light. When the light dissipated, the blood-colored flag led a travel-worn young man out of the transmission array. When Blood Red War Flag had sent a message to Wuji, Wuji had given Blood Red War Flag 2 teleportation rights. He had not expected this kid to find the blueprint so quickly. Seeing that only Chuanjin's group was in the encampment, Blood Red War Flag was a little surprised. "Am I the first to arrive?" Creating a divine weapon was a very precious opportunity for anyone. As the saying went, first come, first served. Blood Red War Flag thought it would not be able to get in the queue. "Of course," Wuji said calmly. "Not every guild boss trusts us like you do." Boss Wuji is right. Blood Red War Flag was stunned for a moment before a joyful expression appeared on its face. Wuji's EQ had never been low. When he wanted to speak nicely, he was very good at winning people's hearts. With a casual sentence, he had explained the problem and made Blood Red War Flag feel that they agreed with him. As a non-combat profession, this kid was the boss of this group of experts in Chuanjin. It seemed like there was a reason why he could be the boss. "All right, stop talking nonsense. Who is the Grandmaster Blacksmith?" Just as Wuji and Blood Red War Flag were chatting happily, the young man behind Blood Red War Flag could not wait any longer and spoke impatiently. "Young master, this is not your home. Don't speak like this." When a young man spoke, Blood Red War Flag, who was in a good mood, turned pale. It hurriedly turned around and covered the young man's mouth. When everyone in Chuanjin saw this, they could not help but raise their eyebrows. Their gazes were attracted to the young man. The young man was in his 20s. He had a medium build and was quite handsome. However, he had an unruly look on his face. He had the demeanor of to place one's pride when he was young. Seeing the young man's appearance, everyone from Chuanjin sect revealed a strange smile at the same time. Well, he actually dared to make a fuss in Chuanjin's territory. He even dared to forcibly interrupt old dog Wuji's words. It seemed that this kid was not a veteran player of Blood Red War Flag. Moreover, Blood Red War Flag did not teach him well before he came. "What are you doing?" The young man did not seem to be afraid of Blood Red War Flag at all. He then slapped Blood Red War Flag's hand to the side and shouted, "This is Yu Huicheng. I can speak however I want." It's precisely because this is Yu Hui Cheng that you can't speak like that, Blood Red War Flag said with sweat dripping down his forehead. Hee hee. Young people are very energetic. Wuji had always been expressionless towards outsiders. The young man's sudden interruption did not make Wuji angry. Instead, he raised his chin and asked, My name is Thousand Miles. I am the guild leader of Blood Alliance. Just as Blood Red War Flag was about to speak, the young man interrupted Blood Red War Flag and introduced himself. Guild leader? Hearing Thousand Miles' self-introduction, everyone in Xuanzhen could not help but look at Blood Red War Flag. Wasn't Blood Red War Flag the guild leader of Blood Alliance? When did this crimson Thousand Miles appear? They had never heard of him. Could it be that Blood Alliance also had internal strife? Thinking of this, evildoers Run Wild empathized with them. His face was full of sympathy. They were all in the same boat. Vice. Blood Red War Flag explained awkwardly. My dad said that I'll be the main one soon. Thousand Miles added without giving them any face. Your dad lied to you. You'll have to leave after 2 days. Blood Red War Flag did not back down. What a mess. What's going on? Wuji and the others almost burst out laughing. Wang Yu was the kinder one, so he sent a private message to Blood Red War Flag. Our boss's son. He just finished his college entrance exams and came to play for a few days. Blood Red War Flag explained gloomily. They had no choice. Even though Blood Red War Flag had over 10,000 subordinates, they were just workers. Their status was not even as high as the Grim Reaper's left hand. In front of the boss who sponsored them, they were not even worth mentioning. The fact that the boss did not make his own son the guild leader was already giving Blood Red War Flag a lot of face. College entrance exams? How old is this person? Hearing Blood Red War Flag's explanation, Wang Yu was dumbfounded. This kid was so mature that he did not look like a high school student. Could it be that his name was Fan Jin? He's a teacher. Blood Red War Flag wiped his sweat. I see. Wang Yu nodded thoughtfully. At this time, Thousand Miles said to Wuji, Your guild's base isn't good. It's much smaller than our Blood Alliance. It can't be helped. Our Xuanzhen only has a few dozen people. We can't compare to your Blood Alliance. Wuji said humbly. That's true. Thousand Miles nodded. However, your guild isn't simple either. I heard that 2 master blacksmiths are in your guild. You flatter me, Wuji said. I was just lucky. Chapter 1658. What the F*** CK? When Blood Red War Flag saw Thousand Miles acting so pretentiously in front of Wuji, Blood Red War Flag felt a headache coming on. In order to prevent Thousand Miles from bothering Wuji again, Blood Red War Flag hurriedly moved closer to Wuji and changed the topic, saying, Boss Wuji, can we start forging equipment now? Sure. Wuji smiled faintly. Did you bring the materials? Materials? Didn't you say you only wanted the blueprints? Blood Red War Flag was confused. I said I wanted the blueprints. I didn't say I only wanted the blueprints. Wuji looked at Thousand Miles and said, Young Master Thousand Miles is rich and arrogant. He even dared to say that he wanted to poach Xuanzhen's people in front of me. If he can't even take out these materials, how can he support 2 Grandmaster blacksmiths? Wuji wasn't a petty person. Thousand Miles Crimson had the Blood Alliance for him to play with at such a young age. So naturally, he had the confidence to be arrogant. At the start, Wuji only treated his words as a child and didn't take them to heart. However, his last sentence was a bit too much. Thousand Miles also knew that there were only 2 Grandmaster blacksmiths in the entire game. As the saying goes, rare goods are worth hoarding. These 2 blacksmiths could be called Xuanzhen's money trees. Not to mention Xuanzhen's current position in Yu Hui Cheng. Even if it was a small guild, it was against the rules for a player from a big guild to say that he wanted to poach someone else's money tree in front of their guild leader. There were only 2 types of people who would do such a thing. One was a brainless person, and the other was an obvious bully. It was obvious that Thousand Miles was just acting cool. It wasn't that he was brainless. He wanted to bully Xuanzhen because they were alone and wanted to take advantage of them. The people from the Quanzhen sect were a group of fierce bandits. They had always been the ones bullying others, and no one had ever dared to bully them. As the leader of such a group of fierce bandits, how could Wu Ji be the kind of person who would let others bully him? Fortunately, the Quanjun sect had a good relationship with the blood-red war flag. If it were anyone else, there would probably be a bloodbath. Whether or not the blood-red 1,000 miles could survive was another matter. Wu Ji was already being polite by extorting materials from him. Blood-red war flag. As expected, they shouldn't have brought this kid. Let's see how he gets out of this. Of course, the blood-red war flag wasn't someone to be trifled with. After dealing with the Quanjin sect for so long, he naturally knew Wu Ji's temper. Now that he dared to persuade Wu Ji dared to give him an attitude. The blood-red war flag definitely wouldn't look for trouble. Moreover, although this blood-red Miles was the boss's son, blood-red war flag wasn't familiar with him. Even if they were from the same guild, there was no need for them to be friends with each other. Moreover, from another perspective, blood-red Miles was also blood-red war flag's opponent. After this kid came to the guild, he obviously didn't care about him, the guild leader. Now that Wu Ji was helping him take down 1,000 Miles, it wasn't a bad thing for blood-red war flag. How can you say that 1,000 Miles wasn't stupid? Of course, he could tell that Wu Ji was lying. Hearing Wu Ji's strange tone, 1,000 Miles immediately became angry. Oh, it seems like young Master 1,000 Miles can't take out the materials. Wu Ji smiled and pointed at 1,000 Miles. He said to the Chuanjin players, "See that? He's so poor, but he still dares to act rich." At this point, Wu Ji shook his head and sighed. He put on an expression of sorrow for his misfortune and anger at his incompetence. Huh. Seeing Wu Ji's expression, the Chuanjin players didn't hold back and laughed. Even blood-red war flag couldn't help but laugh. Damn, this Wu Ji really knew how to make fun of people. At the end of the day, 1,000 Miles Crimson was still a child. How could he be a match for an old dog like Wu Ji when it came talking? He just wanted to show off his wealth. But he ended up being led into a ditch by Wu Ji. Who said that? 1,000 Miles panicked when he heard others say that he was poor. He explained with a red face, "Our blood alliance has money. It's just materials. War flag, give it to him." As he said this, 1,000 Miles waved at blood-red war flag like he was calling a lackey. F***CK. Seeing this, blood-red war flag, who was watching the show, curled his lips. Damn, this kid was showing off his wealth, asking me to pay for it. Although Blood Alliance had a lot of assets and didn't lack materials, this was the hard-earned money of their brothers. How could they let this prodigal kid waste it? Especially when his neighbor was an evil person like Chuanjin. If it didn't make things difficult for him, Blood Alliance's assets would be ruined by him in no time. Thinking of this, Blood Red War Flag said awkwardly, "I don't care about the materials. Ask for it from the warehouse manager. Look for Blood Shura." I'll look for it." Seeing that Blood Red War Flag wasn't listening to him, 1,000 Miles snorted. He opened his friend's list and found Blood Shura. Although epic equipment didn't require as many materials as legendary equipment, it still required a lot of materials. The materials for rebirth had been monopolized by reigning the world for a long time, so the other guilds did not have much in store. Blood Alliance definitely had the materials, but Blood Azura told 1,000 Miles in a serious tone that these materials were for professional teams to use, and without the boss's approval, they could not use them. In Blood Alliance, even Blood Red War Flag had to give 1,000 Miles some respect. This time, the epic equipment was definitely for 1,000 Miles. Even if he was the boss' son, he couldn't use the materials. "You're all against me." Seeing that Blood Shura wasn't giving him the materials, 1,000 Miles became anxious. He pointed at Blood Red War Flag and said, "Do you think I don't have a way? I'll buy them myself. Okay? Just you wait." As he said this, 1,000 Miles went out to buy the materials. "Damn it, where are you going to buy them?" At this moment, the monster Hung Xing called out to the Crimson 1,000 Miles. "What? I can't buy the materials outside of here?" 1,000 Miles said unhappily. Evildoers Run Wild smiled and said, "I'm not sure if you can buy the materials outside of here. Without me, you definitely wouldn't have been able to buy them." "What a joke. Who do you think you are?" 1,000 Miles said with disdain. "Oh, by hi. Blood Red War Flag, didn't like this guy. Couldn't young people be more polite? Why did he attack everyone he saw? Wuji hadn't even calmed down yet, and this guy had offended evildoers run wild. He's evildoers run wild. Blood Red War Flag quickly said, all the materials in rebirth belong to him. What? Hearing Blood Red War Flag say this, 1,000 Miles' face turned pale. He looked at evildoers run wild in surprise, then looked at Wang Yu, who looked exactly like evildoers run wild, and said, this evildoers run wild is also a member of their guild? No. Blood Red War Flag thought for a moment and said seriously, in theory, evildoers run wild is just a little brother here. Chapter 1659. Little Brother? Hearing Blood Red War Flag's words, 1,000 Miles' eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Since Crimson 1,000 Miles didn't even know who the real boss of Yuhui City was, it was obvious that he didn't know much about the current powers in the game. However, Crimson 1,000 Miles had heard of Rampaging Demons, a guild that covered the entire game. However, such a strong player was just a little brother in front of Chuanjin. This was unbelievable. If he didn't know that Blood Red War Flag wouldn't lie to him, he wouldn't have believed such nonsense, even if he was beaten to death. It's true, Blood Red War Flag added. The reason why Chuanjin agreed to forge equipment for us is because they want to help us move unhindered back to the mines. To move unhindered, Blood-Colored Miles might be young, but he was no fool. After hearing Blood-Colored War Flag's words, Blood-Colored Miles immediately calmed down. The way he looked at the people from the Quan Jun sect also became respectful. To move unhindered had suffered an unprecedented blow, but to move unhindered to regroup. To move unhindered in the game, someone who could clean up the mess was not someone to be trifled with. To be able to do this, one could see the breadth of their influence. However, when he thought about it, it made sense. Everyone knew that there were only 2 Grandmaster Blacksmiths in the entire Rebirth server. These 2 Grandmaster Blacksmiths were both from the Quan Jin sect. The Quan Jin sect could be considered to have monopolized the market for divine weapons in the game. Such a guild could be said to be an arms supplier in the game. What was the most important thing in the game? Equipment. Which guild would be foolish enough to offend an arms supplier? It was not surprising that they had such prestige. Of course, 1,000 Miles' thoughts were not wrong, but he clearly did not understand what Blood Red War Flag was trying to express. However, Blood Red War Flag had achieved its goal of getting 1,000 Miles to behave. Thinking about this, 1,000 Miles became much more low-key. With a smile on his face, he walked in front of Evildoers Run Wild, showed the attributes of the blueprint, and asked Evildoers Run Wild, "Boss, how much are the materials?" Evildoers Run Wild glanced at the list of materials on the blueprint and said, 500,000 gold. 500,000? Blood-Colored 1,000 Miles glared at him and said, why don't you just rob them? Evildoers Run Wild was a true big shot in the game. Even his father, 1,000 Miles Bloody, had to be courteous to Evildoers Run Wild, let alone 1,000 Miles Bloody. Naturally, 1,000 Miles Bloody wouldn't spoil 1,000 Miles Bloody. He replied, do you know how to talk, young man? This is a serious business. If you want to buy it, then buy it. If you don't want to buy it, then get lost. Why are you pretending when you can't afford it? Me. 1,000 Miles did not dare to offend Evildoers Run Wild. Although Evildoers Run Wild had rebuked him, he did not dare to lose his temper on the spot. Instead, he gritted his teeth and said, fine, 500,000 it is. As he said this, Evildoers Run Wild took out a bag of money and handed it to Evildoers Run Wild. Evildoers Run Wild did not even look at it and casually threw it to Wuji. Ha! Wuji smiled and revealed a mocking expression. He was clearly mocking 1,000 Miles. Kid, no matter how arrogant you are, you still have to drink the water I wash my feet with. Although 1,000 Miles Bloody was furious at Evildoers Run Wild's actions, there was nothing he could do. After all, Evildoers Run Wild's reputation was quite domineering, and even 1,000 Miles Bloody couldn't resist the temptation of a godly item. If he really offended Evildoers Run Wild, Blood Alliance's source of materials would probably be cut off, let alone himself. Moreover, Thousand Miles Bloody considered himself to be rich, so naturally, he would not be afraid of a mere 500,000 gold. Seeing Thousand Miles Bloody being punished by Wuji, Blood Red War Flag could not help but send a private message to Wuji. Boss Wuji, you're going too far. One wrong word, and you're asking for 500,000 gold. Huh, Wuji calmly replied. That's because I'm giving face to Blood Alliance. If it were any other guild, the price wouldn't be as simple as 500,000. After sending the message, Wuji raised his head and smiled at Blood Red War Flag. Wuji's smile made Blood Red War Flag's hair stand on end, and they couldn't help but sigh. As expected, Chuanjin was still the same Chuanjin. Just because he hadn't bared his fangs for a long time, he couldn't ignore the fact that this was a group of ferocious beasts. Fortunately, Blood Alliance was dealing with Chuanjin in Yuhuichen. If it was a reckless young man like Thousand Miles Bloody, Blood Alliance's fate would probably be the same as sword-pointing heaven. Now that he had the blueprint and the materials, the next step was to forge the equipment. Wang Yu didn't hate Thousand Miles Bloody, but he didn't really like him either. Moreover, blacksmithing wasn't Wang Yu's main profession, so Thousand Miles Bloody's blueprint was given to Chopper 345. Thousand Miles Bloody was an archer, and the blueprint in his hands was a bow blueprint. The bow's name was Sunset Stars, and it sounded very arrogant. Weapons were the most important equipment for players, so the value of a weapon blueprint was naturally higher than other equipment. It could be seen that Thousand Miles Bloody was quite skilled. As a professional blacksmith, Chopper 345's craftsmanship was top-notch. Even though Wang Yu was also a grandmaster, and his level was slightly higher than Chopper 345's, Wang Yu had to admit that Chopper 345's fundamentals were much more solid. Wang Yu wasn't a professional, so there was a gap between him and Chopper 345. Not only that, but even if Wang Yu drew blueprints or researched nuclear reactors, Wang Yu wouldn't be as professional as Chun Xiang or Bao San. Chopper 345 placed the blueprint on the workbench and threw the materials into the furnace. After the materials were melted, they were poured into the mold. After forging, the components of the Sunset Star's bow were completed. The next step was to skillfully string and assemble the bow. Although the shape of the bow was different, it was still the same. Chopper had assembled tens of thousands of bows, and at this moment, it was like moving clouds and flowing water, dazzling everyone's eyes. Clang! Following the sound of a successful crafting notification, a longbow appeared in Chopper 345's hands. Chopper 345 opened the equipment display. Sunset Stars, Longbow, Epic, Unnamed Attack, Magic. I won't write down the specific attributes since they aren't important. Hiss! Before even seeing Zhang Gong's attributes, Thousand Miles Crimson couldn't help but gape at the name. On the other hand, Chopper stood calmly at the side with an enigmatic smile on his face. Chapter 1660. In Rebirth, the equipment created by players was also divided into different grades. Generally, equipment with low attributes that did not reach the upper limit of the main attribute would be called substandard. For example, a level 20 legendary weapon with an upper limit of 200 attributes would be called substandard if it only had 100 attributes. If it could reach the upper limit of the grade, it would be called a finished product. If one of the attributes was maxed out, which was 200 to 200, the equipment would be called a small top-grade item. If the main attributes were all maxed out, it would be called a top-grade item. If the equipment had the word unnamed, it would be the best of the best. This was because apart from maxing out the main attributes, the equipment would also have an additional attribute based on the name of the player. Although most of the additional attributes were of little value, the significance of an unnamed equipment was not only the level of the attributes, but also the system's recognition of the player's subprofession. Since the start of Rebirth, the number of unnamed equipment did not exceed a single digit. Every single one of them was the work of a master, and every single one of them was bought by the creator for a high price. To them, this was an honor. Even Wang Yu, who was known as the god of craftsmen and had created numerous godly equipment, had never created an unnamed equipment. From this, one could see how perfect this equipment was. Originally, Thousand Miles was still brooding over the additional 500,000 gold coins he had spent, but when he saw the word unnamed on the equipment, he immediately felt relieved. There was indeed no such thing as a waste of money in this world. Little Chopper, aren't you going to buy it? When Wuji saw that Thousand Miles Crimson had obtained such a good piece of equipment, he intentionally walked over Chopper's side and egged him on. There's no need. Chopper waved his hand and said solemnly, this might be an honor for other blacksmiths, but for me, it's just a learning experience. Everyone has their own goals, and we shouldn't be obsessed with past glory. Damn, are you serious? Little Chopper's dignified explanation left all the Chuanjin dogs speechless. They didn't expect that other than Wang Yu, there was another person in Chuanjin who was in the intermediate realm. Chopper blushed and said embarrassedly, it's mainly because I can't afford it. Everyone in Chuanjin, just as Wuji was about to say that he had money, Thousand Miles of Crimson yelled, I won't sell it even if I can afford it. An outstanding blacksmith like you shouldn't be cooped up in a place like this. This kind of place? When the members of the Chuanjin sect heard this, their expressions darkened. It looked like this little bastard had not been taught enough. Seeing the expressions of the Quan Jun players, Blood Red War Flag quickly changed the topic. Thousand Miles, hurry up and name the equipment. Oh. Crimson Mile responded and quickly filled in the blank space with the word setting sun. After he clicked confirm, the two words turned into a ray of light and attached to the bow, turning into two Chinese characters that were engraved on the side of the bow. At the same time, there were two lines of words at the bottom of the bow. Builder, Chopper 345 Sunset. Namer, Thousand Miles of Blood active skill. Fires an arrow that shines like the sun. Deals 120% physical damage to the target and has a 3-second blind effect. Cooldown, 60 seconds. MP cost, 10%. Builder was a symbol that every player had when they created equipment. Sunset was a skill that was created based on the name of Thousand Miles of Blood. Although the skill's damage wasn't high, the MP cost was very high. However, it had a blind effect. This skill was quite good for archers who lacked crowd control skills. After Thousand Miles of Blood received this bow, his mouth hadn't closed at all. Fortunately, this game was quite realistic. Otherwise, his mouth would have stretched all the way to the back of his head. Looking at Crimson Thousand Miles' proud expression, Wuji and the rest could not help but curse in their hearts. Damn it, such a waste of such a good item. Casting pearls before swine, we have to find an opportunity to snatch it back. Just as Thousand Miles of Blood was feeling excited, a system announcement rang out. Announcement: Chuanjin player Chopper 345 has successfully created a godly weapon, Sunset Stars, for Blood Alliance player Thousand Miles of Blood. His glorious deeds will forever be recorded in the history of Sunset Stars. Thousand Miles of Blood clicked show when the system asked if he wanted to show off his weapon. Wasn't the purpose of playing a game to show off equipment? Thousand Miles of Blood's actions were normal. However, when the stats of the Sunset Stars were announced, it caused a commotion among the major guilds. These major guilds naturally knew that Chuanjin had used a chance to create equipment in exchange for a mine. However, this was a bit of a fantasy to most people. After all, godly weapons were very distant existences to most people. This was the same for the players of these major guilds. Because of this, other than Chuanjin's old friend from the Blood Alliance, no one else took the initiative to stand out. They didn't expect Chuanjin to keep their promise and really create a godly weapon. Moreover, it was a godly weapon with full stats and an unnamed name. Everyone knew that compared to the equipment rewarded in the game, the equipment created by players had much better stats. This was because players could create a finished product most of the time. However, the stats of the equipment rewarded by the system depended on luck. At the current stage of the game, an epic equipment rewarded by the system was worth 300,000 gold coins. Although there wasn't any artificially created epic equipment, one could imagine that it would only be worth more than that. As for the value of the mine in the hands of the major guilds, the Dark Alliance had already stated that it was only 500,000 gold coins. At this moment, Everyone was using a hot potato to exchange for a priceless piece of epic equipment. No matter how they looked at it, it wasn't a loss. Wuji had long since expected the system announcement. Wuji was well aware of the intentions of the major guilds. Seeing the announcement in the sky, Wuji chuckled. Do you see that? This is the system's advertisement for us. Before tonight, all of your minds will be taken back. As expected, not long after Wuji finished speaking, Wuji and Thousand Miles of Blood's message boards were flooded with messages. If it wasn't for the fact that Chopper 345 had set up a system to reject all messages from strangers, he might have been the one to suffer the most. Those who contacted Wuji were naturally asking about the process and what they needed to bring to create the equipment. On the other hand, those who contacted Thousand Miles of Blood were people who thought they were smart. They wanted to know what Thousand Miles of Blood was going to bring so that Wuji wouldn't be able to scam them again. Wuji's reply was simple. Just bring the blueprints. Thousand Miles of Blood's reply was based on his experience. Bring the blueprints and materials. If you don't have the materials, you could buy them here. Chapter 1661. Storytelling, acting, and persuading people. Walking in the middle of the three paths, good and evil will be repaid in the end. Last time, it was mentioned that under Chopper 345's forging, the Blood Alliance player Thousand Miles Crimson obtained his first godly weapon. The system announcement also alerted the other guilds. They all contacted Wuji and expressed their willingness to exchange their minds for a chance to forge equipment. The guild leaders all rushed to Chuanjin's encampment. In an instant, Chuanjin's entrance was filled with people. To be honest, this was the first time Chuanjin's encampment had so many people besides the time it was attacked. Seeing that the guild leaders had come to offer their minds, Evildoers Run Wild was overjoyed. Although materials were precious, compared to a mining area, it was like the difference between an egg and a chicken. Exchanging some materials for a main city's mining area without using weapons was naturally a very worthwhile deal for a monster like Rampage. However, the happiest person wasn't Evildoers Run Wild, but Chopper 345. As the saying goes, it's hard to find a confidant in one's life. As a dispirited player, before meeting Wang Yu, Chopper 345's life was very bleak. In fact, deep down, this child really wanted to be recognized by others. Now that so many guild leaders had come all the way to ask him to forge equipment for them, Chopper 345 felt an unprecedented sense of satisfaction. Naturally, he was in a good mood. Unsurprisingly, the second piece of equipment that Chopper 345 forged was also a top-tier equipment with full attributes. While everyone was in awe, Chopper 345 handed the equipment to Uncrying Reaper. However, Uncrying Reaper had a look of disappointment on his face. Blacksmiths and chefs were both craftsmen. They weren't afraid of not being able to sell their goods, but they were afraid that others wouldn't like their work. Seeing the disappointment on Uncrying Reaper's face, Chopper felt as if he was looking at a chef who didn't even take a bite of his food. His heart skipped a beat, and he cautiously asked, "What's wrong? You don't like it? Or did something go wrong?" No. Uncrying Reaper waved his hand in disappointment. "I'm actually quite satisfied with it. But why isn't it an unnamed equipment, huh?" Hearing Uncrying Reaper's words, the surrounding onlookers wished they could spit on his face. It was hard to tell that this bastard was a perfectionist despite his ugly appearance. His chances of forging unnamed equipment were no less than an ordinary player soloing a celestial boss. Even if Chopper was a grandmaster blacksmith, it was impossible for every piece of equipment to be unnamed. He had already created a F** King top-grade item with full attributes. Why would he still need a bicycle? He really deserved a beating if he didn't know how to be satisfied. Uncrying Reaper was no fool. Of course, he could see the emotions of the people around him. However, as a perfectionist, Uncrying Reaper sighed and walked to the side. While Uncrying Reaper was gloomy, Chopper 345 finished forging his second piece of equipment. When the equipment's attributes were displayed, the owner of the equipment gasped in surprise. Uncrying Reaper was taken aback. He quickly opened the second piece of equipment that Chopper had forged. It was an unnamed piece of equipment. The surrounding onlookers sucked in a breath of cold air when they saw this. Although they weren't blacksmiths, they had heard of the probability of obtaining unnamed equipment. There were more than 10 million blacksmiths in the game, but there were less than 10 unnamed pieces of equipment in the 6 months since the game's launch. The probability was so low that it made one's hair stand on end. However, in less than half an hour, Chopper had forged 2 unnamed pieces of equipment. Such a strange thing was simply unheard of. Originally, Uncrying Reaper comforted himself with the probability. However, when he saw Chopper forge another unnamed piece of equipment, he was depressed. F***CK, 2 of the 3 pieces of equipment were unnamed. Why did he miss out on it? Just as Uncrying Reaper was in a dilemma, someone suddenly walked up to the person who obtained the unnamed equipment. I think I saw that apart from the blueprints, you also gave something to the blacksmith. Nonsense. That person curled his lips. How can a blacksmith forge without materials? Hearing that person's words, Uncrying Reaper was dumbfounded. Materials? Isn't it provided by Chuanjin? That's right. Hearing this, the others frowned and asked. Before they came, they had consulted Wuji multiple times. I don't know. That person also looked at the Crimson Thousand Miles not far away with a blank expression. That brother from the Blood Alliance told me that I have to bring my own materials. Hearing that person's words, everyone became silent. At this moment, someone in the crowd mumbled, "It can't be such a coincidence, right? The people who brought their own materials all forged unnamed equipment. The speaker had an ulterior motive, and the listener had an ulterior motive." Hearing this, everyone's heart couldn't help but tighten. Wasn't that right? How could there be such a coincidence in this world? The probability of forging unnamed equipment was so low. Forging 1 piece could be considered a coincidence, but forging 2 pieces consecutively, and these 2 pieces were made with their own materials. If this was a coincidence, then it was really a coincidence. It was obvious that the problem was with the materials. The players of the big guilds, especially the guild leaders, were mostly people who cared about appearances. If they wanted to show off, they would show off. For the guild leaders of these big guilds, holding a handmade, unnamed sword in their hands was no different from carrying a limited edition bag. Although the materials needed for epic equipment were rare, as the leaders of the big guilds, these materials were not a problem. Everyone had already taken out something as expensive as the blueprints, so they didn't mind spending tens of thousands of gold to buy materials. After all, being able to carry an unnamed equipment on the streets wasn't just a symbol of strength. It also represented a special honor. To be able to spend tens of thousands of gold to get a limited edition godly equipment to attract attention. Most players were very happy. As a result, the players who didn't bring materials all spent money to buy materials from evildoers run wild. This sudden turn of events caught the group from the Quanjun sect and the Monster Rampage sect off guard. As people in the know, Chuanjin knew that this was a coincidence. Seeing everyone buy materials in such a superstitious manner, they couldn't help but be dumbfounded. What the hell was going on? This time, Chuanjin had evildoers run wild as a sponsor, and they were very sincere in providing materials to forge equipment for free. But these big guild players didn't appreciate it at all, and instead spent their own money to buy materials. Sigh, in this society, was it so hard to do a good deed sincerely? Chapter 1662. In fact, people who were slightly more rational knew that it was a matter of probability, but most people were still willing to gamble. Of course, Chopper didn't disappoint them. After more than 2 hours of continuous forging, he had forged a total of 97 pieces of epic equipment. Among them, there were 16 pieces of top-grade equipment, 73 pieces of top-grade equipment, and as many as 8 pieces of unnamed equipment. With the 3 pieces of equipment that he had forged previously, Chopper had increased the success rate of forging unnamed equipment to 10%. Such a frightening number was simply unheard of. Chopper 345's name, along with the continuous system announcements, became a hot topic in the game. After all, godly equipment was so far away from the players in Rebirth. However, in just 2 hours, this guy called Chopper had actually forged 100 pieces of epic equipment. This could be called a godly equipment assembly line. Such a high production efficiency was unheard of in the history of the game. Not only that, but Xuanjin also became famous. Xuanjin hadn't been quiet since the start of the game. Old players knew that this was a group of roving bandits, and new players also knew that this was a small guild with less than 20 people, 1/3 of which were non-combatants. However, it was this small guild that refreshed everyone's understanding of the game time and time again. With just 8 people, they were the first to take down the guild base. They were the exclusive supplier of high-level potions in the game. With just 1 person, they resisted the encirclement of players from 100 cities and won. This made Huicheng the first neutral main city since the start of Rebirth. They were also the first to open up the sea route and start a war, seizing 1/3 of Yingzhou Island. The most inconceivable thing was that this group of guys, as a grassroots team, used the attitude of a dark horse to suppress the 9 Regions team and win a championship of the National League. Any one of these achievements would be incredible to ordinary people, but all of them appeared in the hands of a small guild with only a dozen people. Such a guild could only be described as a miracle. And now, a blacksmith who forged 100 pieces of godly equipment in 2 hours appeared in Xuanjin, setting an epic record. The players in Rebirth were already numb to the Quanjin sect. As for the guild leaders who had gathered in Xuanjin's residence to watch Chopper forge, they were even more excited. As they watched Chopper forge, they revealed expressions of eagerness. Fortunately, the leaders of these large guilds weren't inexperienced brats like Thousand Miles Crimson. They had all heard of the Quanjin sect's evil reputation. If not for the fact that they were afraid of the Quanjin sect, they would have already started poaching the Quanjin sect's members. After all, having such a blacksmith was tantamount to having a divine weapon manufacturing machine. It would be a waste to have such a capable person holed up in Xuanjin. Thousand Miles of Crimson sighed. Sigh, what a pity! With such a talent, our Blood Alliance should be the first to enjoy the moonlight. From the start, Thousand Miles Blood had wanted to poach Chopper. After getting the equipment, he didn't leave and just stood in the crowd to watch the show. At this moment, the more he looked at Chopper, the more he admired him. He couldn't wait to pull him into Blood Alliance. My head hurts. Hearing this, Blood Red War Flag subconsciously rubbed its head. Blood Red War Flag wasn't an idiot. Of course, they could tell what Thousand Miles Blood was thinking. This kid had just arrived and didn't know how scary Xuanjin was. He always wanted to play with fire. Who didn't know that the pavilion closest to the water enjoyed the moonlight first? However, they had to act within their means. Otherwise, who would be willing to sleep next to someone else? At the end of the day, Blood Red War Flag was still thinking for Blood Alliance. Bloody Thousand Miles was a young master who had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Blood Alliance still had to survive in Afterglow City. If Bloody Thousand Miles died, then so be it. If he dragged Blood Alliance down with him, then Blood Red War Flag would be responsible. In order to prevent Blood Alliance from being dragged down by this brat, Thousand Miles Blood Red tried to stop him. Young master, can you stop? What? Don't you want to recruit such a good blacksmith? Thousand Miles of Crimson asked as if there was no one else around. What? Upon hearing the Crimson Mile's words, everyone turned their heads and looked at the Crimson Mile in unison. Seeing that the person who said this was a young man, everyone sighed, as expected of a young man. He doesn't know how to control his mouth and speak his mind. Lower your voice. Seeing this, Blood Red War Flag was scared out of its wits. It couldn't help but kick Thousand Miles Blood Red. It was obvious that Thousand Miles Blood Red was speaking so loudly. He wanted to use Blood Alliance's name to cause trouble in Xuanjin's territory. He wanted to show off his claws to Xuanjin in front of all the big guilds. Blood Red War Flag didn't dare to let him do this. What? Are you afraid of Xuanjin? Thousand Miles Blood Red shouted again. Nonsense. Who isn't? Blood Red War Flag frowned. Let's go. Don't say such things in someone else's territory. Thousand Miles Blood Red looked at Blood Red War Flag in disdain and said, Brother Warflag, my dad always says that you are cautious and capable, but in my eyes, not only are you useless, but you also don't have the guts. No wonder our blood alliance hasn't made much progress after so many years. What the F***CK? Blood Red Warflag was a middle-aged man. After being mocked by a kid like Thousand Miles Blood Red, one could imagine how he felt. He almost cursed out loud. But so what? Blood Alliance didn't belong to Blood Red Warflag, and everything Blood Red Warflag owned came from Blood Alliance. Thousand Miles Blood Red was the young master of Blood Alliance, so Blood Red Warflag naturally didn't dare to offend him. Suppressing his anger, Blood Red Warflag said calmly, "No matter what you think, I advise you to leave quickly. Otherwise, I won't be able to explain myself." "What if I don't want to leave?" Thousand Miles Blood Red raised his eyebrows and provoked. "Then don't blame me for being rude." Blood Red Warflag took out his spear and said, "I am the guild leader, and you are the vice leader. If you don't listen to my orders, then you're not following the rules. I have the right to kick you out of the guild. Don't you dare." Hearing Blood Red Warflag's words, Thousand Miles Blood Red was instantly enraged. He glared at Blood Red Warflag with an unconvinced expression. "Of course I dare. Believe it or not, I can stab you to death right now." Saying that, Blood Red Warflag extended his right hand and pressed his spear against Thousand Miles Blood Red's throat. Thousand Miles Blood Red was an archer, so of course, he was no match for Blood Red Warflag in close combat. Seeing that Blood Red Warflag was serious, Thousand Miles Blood Red was terrified. He glared at Blood Red Warflag and said, "Humph, I'll leave then. Just you wait." Chapter 1663. Apart from the players, the game company was the most shocked at this moment. Ever since the creation of online games, there had never been a game that could stay open forever. After all, no matter how novel a game was, there was a limit to its playstyle. There were many more players than the game designer, and no matter how many holes the game designer dug, it would not be able to sustain the development of so many players. Once a game's playstyle was fully developed, it would be the end of the road for the game. Because of this, the game had to be constantly updated in terms of playstyle and expansion packs in order to continue operating for as long as possible. However, the designer's imagination was limited, and it was impossible for him to come up with new ideas every day. Therefore, other than updating the playstyle, the most direct method was to increase the difficulty of the game. As the saying goes, a thin stream flows for a long time. Players only needed a goal when they played the game. As long as there were quests that they could not complete or bosses that they could not kill, then they would continue playing. Of course, there was a way to increase the difficulty of the game. If the monsters were too overpowered, it would definitely affect the experience of the new players. Not only would the old players not be able to stay, but it would also dissuade the new players. Therefore, the gaming company could only tamper with the drop rate. If the drop rate was low, it would give the players a psychological hint that it's not that they can't defeat the boss, it's that they don't have good equipment. This would increase the players' enthusiasm for the game, and it would also allow the players to experience the satisfaction and sense of accomplishment of killing monsters and dropping equipment. Even a slight increase in the status panel would make the players excited. If a game had a high drop rate, the players might be excited at first, but after a while, they would get tired of the game. This was why the private servers were fun at first, but the more they played, the more boring it became. The drop rate of equipment was well controlled in Rebirth. The game had been open for 10 months, and the average level of the players was already at level 60. However, the mainstream equipment was gold grade. Dark gold equipment was basically for experts, while epic and legendary equipment were very rare. Most players had only heard of them. Therefore, Rebirth was in a balanced state where every level of player had their own goals. If this continued, the stability of the game would be firmly in the hands of the gaming company. However, the appearance of Chopper 345 broke this balance. In just 2 hours, the number of epic equipment in the game had increased by 100. Seeing this, the staff members almost spat blood on the screen. Even the higher-ups of the gaming company were shocked. Although 100 pieces of epic equipment wasn't a lot when compared to the player base of over 100 million players, the impact it would have was far more than that. Crafting equipment in the game wasn't as slow as it was in real life. In the game, players could craft a piece of equipment in an average of 1 minute. With this kind of crafting speed, Chopper 345 was like an equipment crafting machine. If this continued, the entire game would be thrown into chaos. This behavior was much worse than what Wang Yu had done. Although Wang Yu often fought monsters above his level and occasionally released expansion packs, the number of players in Rebirth who were as strong as Wang Yu could be counted on one hand. Even if Wang Yu released the expansion packs in advance, most players would not be able to access them. At most, the game would not be running according to the game company's budget, but it would not affect the progress of the game. However, Chopper's act of mass-producing artifacts disrupted the rhythm of the game. It could be said that it threatened the lifespan of the game to a certain extent. Just think about it. The game had only been open for less than a year, and everyone had a godly artifact in their hands. Other than private servers, no online gaming company would dare to do something like this. Rebirth was the livelihood of the gaming company. Of course, no one would allow a single player to ruin their livelihood. This matter concerned the survival of the game, and no one dared to be careless. Seeing this situation, the higher-ups of the gaming company immediately held a short meeting. After some discussion, they decided to update the game. At the same time, just as Thousand Miles Crimson left the guild encampment in Xuanzhen, the system made an announcement. Emergency announcement. An error has occurred in the game, and the game needs to be updated. All players are requested to log out of the game within 30 minutes. If the update causes any inconvenience, please forgive us. If any losses are incurred due to not logging out, the players will be responsible for it. The game company reserves the right to explain the situation. The game announcement was as stiff as ever, and the players were used to it. Although they did not understand why the game would suddenly update, they obediently logged out of the game. After all, the announcement made it very clear that if any losses were incurred, the players would be responsible for it. Moreover, the game company had the right to explain the situation. In other words, if they were to log out late and lose their data, they would not be able to do anything about it. Why is there an update all of a sudden? Who knows? This damned gaming company is always up to no good. The guild leaders in Xuanzhen's encampment were all depressed. Everyone was in high spirits, and now the system had come out to spoil the mood. However, even though they were unhappy, no one dared to go against the system. As such, the players who had already forged their equipment left the encampment in Xuanzhen. In just a short while, only the players who had yet to forge their equipment were left in Xuanzhen's encampment. It was obvious that there were still 30 minutes before the update, and these players were still waiting for Chopper to forge their equipment. However, when Wuji saw this, he cupped his hands and said, "Everyone, please leave first." Everyone looked at each other, but no one had any intention of leaving. "What's wrong?" Wuji raised his eyebrows and said, "I don't mind if you guys want to lose your data, but Xuanzhen only has one encampment. If something happens because of you, I'm afraid I won't be able to explain it to my brothers." After saying that, Wuji turned to look at the members of Xuanzhen, and his gaze finally fell on Wang Yu. The meaning behind Wuji's words was obvious. Don't be so shameless. If you don't leave, I'll get someone to make a move. Ugh. Everyone was shocked when they saw Wang Yu. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Not everyone was fortunate enough to witness Wang Yu's abilities. However, Wang Yu was also very famous. None of the big shots dared to think that they were his match. With so many people watching, not only would they gain nothing from defeating him, but they would also embarrass themselves if they lost. Since Wuji had already asked them to leave, everyone reluctantly left the encampment in Xuanzhen. "Let's go." Wang Yu waved goodbye to Song Wuji and the others after seeing the big bosses of the various large guilds leave. She then turned around and was about to log off. Chapter 1664. What's wrong? What's wrong? Hearing that, Wang Yu stopped in his tracks, turned around, and asked in confusion. Wuji just chased him out. Why didn't he let him go offline now? Nonsense. Of course there's something, Wuji said. Why do you think those bastards didn't want to go offline? Why? Wang Yu was puzzled, Wuji explained. The game didn't update earlier or later, but at this time. Why do you think it is? Is it because of the equipment forging? Wang Yu rubbed his chin and thought for a moment. He was still puzzled. Isn't it just 100 pieces of equipment? There are so many people in the game. Is there a need to make such a big fuss? 100 pieces of equipment isn't something to make a fuss about, Wuji said. But 100 pieces of epic equipment suddenly appeared in 2 hours. Don't you think it's a big fuss? Wang Yu was speechless. Indeed, epic equipment was rare. Even if Chopper forged one a day, it would attract attention. Not to mention 100 pieces in 2 hours. The onlooker sees the game more clearly. He might not have noticed anything, but to those who didn't know, it was obvious that there was a bug in the system. Even if they knew it wasn't a bug, players would still report it. There were all kinds of people in the game. There were many people who were jealous when they saw others obtaining good equipment. An equipment manufacturing machine, like Chopper, would definitely affect the harmony of the game. With the aim of making money and players as the core, the game company didn't care who was right or wrong. In any case, if most players felt that something was wrong, the game company would definitely resolve it as soon as possible. What about those who didn't forge any equipment? Wang was an upright person. Even at this time, he was still concerned about other people's problems. It's none of our business. Wuji curled his lips and said, We only promised them to use the mine to exchange for a chance to forge equipment. We didn't promise to forge epic-grade equipment for them. We've already signed the contract. Whether or not they can get good equipment depends on their own fate. At this point, Wuji continued, Didn't you say that you also have a blueprint? Ah, yes. Listening to Wuji, Wang Yu nodded quickly. I almost forgot if you didn't mention it. I knew it. Wuji held his forehead and sighed. Let's hurry up and build it before the game updates. Otherwise, after the game updates, who knows what rules and regulations will be put in place to restrict forging. Yes, makes sense. Of course, Wang Yu wasn't the kind of person who wouldn't listen to advice. Although no one knew what the system was going to update, what Wuji said was definitely not without reason. Based on the system's nature, if it wanted to restrict forging, it would most likely lower the forging success rate. Even if Chopper was a professional blacksmith, in the game world, his professional skills were only auxiliary. The system's words were the most important. If the system said that you couldn't forge a weapon, then no matter how successful you were, it would be useless. Just by hearing the name, one could tell that the God Punisher bow was an amazing artifact. Wang Yu glove could transform into a variety of weapons except for the bow. If he didn't forge it now, then he wouldn't be so lucky after the update. Thinking of this, Wang Yu nodded and walked into the forging room. The people in Xuanzhen were all people who liked to join in on the fun. Seeing that it was still early, they weren't in a hurry to go offline, so they followed behind Wang Yu and entered the forging room. Big Bro Iron Ox. Seeing Wang Yu enter, Chopper, who was resting, wiped his sweat and greeted Wang Yu. Do you have any equipment? Do you want me to forge it for you? You rest for a while. Wang Yu waved his hand and said, I'll forge this equipment myself. There is no such thing as stamina in the game, but forging equipment was a very exhausting job, especially for Chopper, who was a high-precision blacksmith. Compared to normal blacksmiths who closed their eyes and channeled their energy, Chopper was extremely tired after forging 100 pieces of equipment. As a kung fu master, Wang Yu's research on the human body was comparable to a medical expert. If it didn't rest for a while, Chopper's energy would still be at its peak. But after resting for a while, Chopper's energy was at its lowest. In this state, it would definitely not be easy to forge an exquisite item. Moreover, Wang Yu was a martial artist, so he was very competitive. They were both grandmaster blacksmiths, so of course, Wang Yu was willing to forge his own equipment. Chopper was also a more sensible child. He knew his current state, so he didn't try to be brave. He quietly retreated to the side. Wang Yu took out a blueprint and laid it flat on the workbench. Then, a forging interface appeared in front of Wang Yu. The forging interface showed the names and quantity of materials that needed to be added. Dark iron, gold essence, magic steel, all kinds of incomparably precious materials were thrown into the furnace by Wang Yu, as if they were free. Under the high temperature of the fire, all the materials were melted into a furnace of crimson molten iron. The black impurities were also extracted in large amounts. The god-slaying, demon-vanquishing bow required very high-purity materials. The materials in Wang Yu's hands were worth millions of gold coins, enough to fill a backpack. However, after removing the impurities, there wasn't much left. In fact, it wasn't even as much as what Chopper had used to forge the dagger. Ding! The large amount of materials was smelted for a full 5 minutes before the smelting was completed. Wang Yu pulled the mold on the workbench to the bottom of the furnace. He gently pulled the handle and carefully poured the crimson molten iron into the mold. After another round of loading, the molten iron gradually solidified into the shape of a bow. According to the system's instructions, Wang Yu took out his forging hammer and started hammering on the bow. Ding, ding, dang, dang. After a series of even and rhythmic tempering, the god executioner magic bow was finally completed. This time, it was a 2-meter-long giant bow, its entire body made of the rarest and most precious metal. The bow was completely black, and apart from the 4 grooves, there weren't any fancy decorations on it. However, its black appearance gave off an unparalleled sense of firmness and explosive power. Wang Yu casually held the bow in his hand. The moment the heavy longbow entered his hand, Wang Yu felt as if he had become one with it. Holding it in his hand and shaking it a few times, Wang Yu couldn't help but praise, "Good bow. Very handy. What about the attributes? Quick, show me the attributes." The Chuanjin members hurriedly urged Wang Yu to show them the weapon's attributes. "Attributes my ass. Can't you see that the bow hasn't been strung up yet? This is a half-finished product." Wu Ji pointed his middle finger at everyone. "Not bad." Chapter 1665. Divine Wood Vine, Precious Material. This divine wood vine was obtained by Wang Yu from the elven ancient tree a long time ago. It was extremely tough and flexible, making it an excellent material for binding armors and bowstrings. Following that, Wang Yu took out 2 more teeth. These 2 dragon teeth were given to Wang Yu by Liao Yuan when he was training with Liao Yuan on Dragon Island. They were perfect for fastening the bowstring. Bows were relatively simple among all the weapons. Wang Yu, who was born in a martial arts family, was very familiar with making a bow. Wang Yu fastened the 2 teeth on the bow, then folded the divine wood vine twice, making 4 of them side by side. Then he grabbed one end with each hand and twisted it. The divine wood vine was twisted into a twist as thick as a child's arm. After doing all this, Wang Yu hung a section of the divine wood vine under the bow and stepped on it with his feet. Then he clamped the bow with his legs and pressed down with both hands, bending the bow. Then he hung the divine wood vine in his hands. Bang! There was a loud noise as the divine wood vine hung on the bow. Picking up the giant bow, Wang Yu casually pulled the bowstring. The bowstring was only slightly open, but the force was so heavy that if it wasn't for Wang Yu's high-strength attribute, he might not have been able to pull it. After all, the divine wood vine's toughness could be said to be unparalleled. A single row of the vine was required to make a contribution, and ordinary archers would not be able to pull it open without 2 hands of strength. However, Wang Yu directly folded it twice and twisted 4 divine wood vines into a bowstring. One could imagine the strength of the bowstring. Ignoring the attributes of this thing, it was not difficult to see that it was tailor-made for strength-type archers. If this arrow were to hit someone, it was estimated that apart from Shield Warrior, no one would be able to withstand a second arrow. After hanging the bowstring, Wang Yu took out the 4 gems he got from Hermit and embedded them according to the shape of the grooves on the bow. Following the insertion of a piece of obsidian, the bow in Wang Yu's hands was finally completed. Right at this moment, the winds and clouds in the sky suddenly began to surge. It's heavenly tribulation. Seeing this scene, everyone from Chuanjin was shocked. Although it was not the first time they had seen a heavenly tribulation, they were still very excited. After all, ordinary people might not be able to witness such a scene even once in their entire lives. Wang Yu was no stranger to heavenly tribulation. Wang Yu had encountered it a few times in the past. No one in the entire game was more familiar with it than Wang Yu. However, this heavenly tribulation was completely different from the ones he had encountered in the past. In terms of momentum alone, it was much more powerful than the heavenly tribulations he had encountered before. In the past, the heavenly tribulation would condense a tribulation cloud directly above the target, and a random bolt of tribulation lightning would fall to deal with it. But this time, it was completely different. In the sky above Chuanjin's encampment, black, white, red, and gold clouds surged over from 4 different directions. From the color of the tribulation clouds, it was not difficult to tell that they were attracted by the 4 gems on the bow. Wang Yu had vaguely heard Hermit talk about the origin of these 4 gems once. Although Wang Yu could not remember the details, he had a general understanding of the gems. It was said that these 4 gems were the 4 primordial forces that existed when the reborn world was created. They represented light, darkness, elements, and life, respectively. The god-vanquishing bow that Wang Yu had forged used the 4 primordial forces of this world, so it was not surprising that it attracted these terrifying tribulation clouds. While everyone was still in a daze, the 4 different types of tribulation clouds collided. After crashing into each other, the tribulation clouds in the sky began to fuse and condense, finally forming a huge vortex of strange colors. Boom! A bolt of lightning as thick as a water bucket spat out from the vortex and landed on the bow in Wang Yu's hands. Boom! With a loud bang, a golden barrier burst forth from Wang Yu's body. Wang Yu's hair stood on end from the explosion. This weapon's tribulation actually injured a player. Fortunately, Wang Yu had a barrier protecting his body. Otherwise, this lightning bolt would have killed him. Before the barrier could disperse, the second bolt of lightning fell. In the game's setting, divine equipment, especially weapons, had a spirit. Therefore, when the equipment underwent tribulation, the player could not throw it away. Otherwise, there was an 80% chance that the equipment would be destroyed, and the remaining 20% chance that the equipment would reject the player who created it. This bow had cost a lot of money and was painstakingly forged. It was impossible to throw it away, so he could only take it head-on. Wang Yu gritted his teeth, pulled out the red scarf around his neck, and raised the god-vanquishing bow to resist the lightning. Boom! 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 With the protection of the red scarf, Wang Yu had 15 seconds of immortality. Another 3 bolts of lightning fell. Although Wang Yu's health was low, he still stood strong. After 5 bolts of lightning, the vortex in the sky finally stopped spinning and disappeared without a trace. System announcement. Player Iron Ox has forged the legendary divine weapon, the god-vanquishing bow. The system announcement appeared 3 times. However, most of the players in the game had already logged off to wait for the update. Apart from Chuanjin's group and Evildoers Run Wild, not many people could see the system announcement. However, among these players was 1,000 Miles Crimson, who was about to log off but was attracted by the tribulation clouds in the sky. Legendary divine weapon, god-vanquishing bow. Hiss! Seeing the announcement in the sky, 1,000 Miles Crimson licked his lips and muttered to himself, as expected of a Grandmaster blacksmith. That chopper only forged an epic equipment, but this Iron Ox actually forged a legendary equipment. How can a trash guild like Chuanjin have the ability to accommodate these two? They're really casting pearls before swine. Sigh. At this point, 1,000 Miles Crimson sighed. Damn it, this blood-red war flag dares to threaten me. I'll teach them a lesson sooner or later. After saying this, 1,000 Miles Crimson glared in the direction of Chuanjin's encampment, then clicked to exit the game. At the same time, in Chuanjin's encampment, Wang Yu looked at the giant bow in his hands with a silly smile on his face. This was the first time he had been so happy over a piece of equipment in the game. The most attractive thing in the game was excellent equipment. The most attractive thing was the attributes of equipment, not to mention that this was a divine weapon in front of him. Seeing Wang Yu grinning like an idiot, Chuanjin's members scratched their ears and cheeks anxiously when they couldn't see the attributes of the equipment. They anxiously shouted, "Damn, old cow, how can you be so kind? What the hell are the attributes of this thing?" He he he. Wang Yu and Wu Ji had been together for a long time, so their two-faced nature had been activated. At this moment, they were smirking as they looked at Chuanjin's members. They seemed to really enjoy watching these people's impatience. However, seeing that these bastards were so curious, Wang Yu didn't continue to keep them in suspense. He casually opened the equipment display. Chapter 1666. God Executioner Bao, Legendary, Attack, 650-650 mana. 650-650 plus 65 Agility plus 65 Strength plus 65 Vitality Nature's Gift, passive skill. When attacking, add an elemental attribute and deal 100% magic damage to the target. Optional attribute, Earth attribute, ignores 60% of target's armor and magic resistance. Water attribute, reduces target's movement speed by 60%. Fire attribute, increases target's damage by 60%. Wind attribute, shooting, increases movement speed by 60%. Current attribute, none. Life sacrifice, passive skill. Sacrifice the target for 60% of damage to heal you. The overflowing HP will be stored as a shield that can block one fatal attack. If the target is killed, 80% of the MP will be returned. Dark Temptation, passive skill. Critical rate and critical damage increased by 60%. Every attack will mark the target. With each additional mark, the player's critical rate increases by 10%. Marks can be stacked up to 10 times. Light's Hope, passive skill. Increases player's attack by 60%. Every attack will mark the target. Each additional mark increases player's attack by 10%. Marks can be stacked up to 10 times. God Executioner, active skill, can be activated after 10 marks of darkness are stacked up to 10 times. Deals the total damage recorded in the marks of darkness to the target. Damage is doubled against targets with a holy attribute. Has a chance of killing the target. Magic Breaker, active skill, can be activated after 10 marks of light are stacked up to 10 times. Deals the total damage recorded in the marks of light to the target. Damage is doubled against targets with the dark attribute. Has a chance of killing the target. Item Introduction. Hands of the 10 Great Divine Weapons. Humans are the strongest beings in this world. No one can stand above them, and no race is allowed to trample or enslave them. According to the legends, this bow was a divine weapon personally designed by the martial god to suppress the god and demon races. It was forged by the Titan race using the most powerful materials in the world, and was imbued with the 4 purest primordial powers when the world was created. After the disappearance of the martial god, this bow was destroyed by the celestials and demons. The blueprints were lost, and it was said to be in the custody of the Dragon Emperor Dales. Level requirement: 65, can be upgraded to a maximum of level 200. Profession requirement: General Heaven's Arrow. Legendary skill: consumes a piece of dark gold or above equipment and 100% MP to attack the target. The power of the attack can pierce the heavens and the earth. The higher the equipment's grade, the stronger the attack. BZZ. As the attributes of Wang Yu's equipment were revealed, the weapons in the hands of the Quan Jun members trembled and whined. It was obvious that the weapons in the hands of the Chuanjin people were divine weapons that had developed spirituality. Ordinary equipment would not have such a reaction. In particular, the divine artifact in Mingdu's hand, the vermilion bird staff, began to become inexplicably restless after sensing the aura of the giant bow in Wang Yu's hand. Mingdu's small arms and legs almost couldn't hold on. Fuck. When the members of the Quan Jin sect saw Wang Yu's attributes, they were all dumbfounded. In fact, even before Wang Yu had forged it, everyone had already mentally prepared themselves that Wang Yu's weapon would definitely be very powerful. After all, not only did this bow have an extremely arrogant name, but it also required a frightening amount of materials. With such a terrifying hardware configuration, it was undoubtedly a legendary item. Even so, when everyone saw the attributes of a longbow in Wang Yu's hands, they were still incomparably shocked. What was a divine artifact? This was a true divine artifact, all right? Armor break, movement speed reduction, high damage, firing speed, lifesteal, critical hit. Apart from the unparalleled main attributes, these additional attributes were all top-tier attributes that archers could not lack. Any one of these attributes could determine the value of a piece of equipment. When these attributes were gathered on a piece of equipment with the highest probability of triggering them, one could just imagine how terrifying that piece of equipment would be. What was even more frightening was that this piece of equipment seemed to be able to level up as the player increased their level. In the game, players had a love-hate relationship with the level requirement of equipment. If the level requirement was too low, the equipment would not be able to keep up with the upgrades. For example, to place one's pride's Thorn of Despair was still a level 20 piece of equipment. Back then, its damage had been astonishing, but now its damage output was rather low. If the level requirement was too high, it would be even more depressing. Having a divine artifact right in front of one's eyes, but unable to use, it was the most tragic thing in the world. However, the level requirement of this god-vanquishing bow could be upgraded according to the player's level. Looking at the attributes on the interface, this bow was currently only level 65. If it reached level 200, it would completely evolve into an ultimate divine artifact. It had to be known that the main attributes of a piece of equipment were directly linked to the level requirement. For example, a level 65 legendary weapon had a maximum attribute of 650. When Shifeng reached level 200, the maximum attribute would increase to 2,000. This also meant that this bow could be used by Wang Yu until the end of his life. A divine artifact that could be used from the start of the game to the end of the game was something that countless players dreamed of. Of course, no matter how powerful a piece of equipment was, there would always be a flaw. For example, the legendary skill at the end was a little ridiculous. What a joke. Dark gold equipment was extremely rare. Using a skill and consuming a piece of dark gold equipment or higher was a little too expensive. The reason why legendary and epic equipment were called divine artifacts was because of the skill at the end. From the looks of it, the skill on this bow was somewhat inconsistent with the bow itself. Even so, the flaws couldn't obscure the gems. Xuanzhen and the others were also experienced people. They had seen their fair share of top-tier equipment. Mingdu even had a top-tier divine artifact. However, it paled in comparison to this bow. Mingdu couldn't help but exclaim, "Damn, compared to this bow, my staff is like a fire stick." Buzz! Just as Mingdu finished speaking, before anyone had a chance to say anything, Mingdu suddenly felt a tremor in his hand, and the vermilion bird staff flew out of his hand. The staff flapped its wings as it flew over Mingdu's head and smashed down. "Oh my god, my head hurts!" Mingdu screamed in pain as he fell to the ground on his butt. At the same time, a ball of raging flames rose around the vermilion bird staff. It looked like a dancing phoenix, jumping around at Wang Yu, as if it was provoking him. The giant bow in Wang Yu's hand vibrated, and a cloud of grayish, chaotic fog rose from his body. When the two auras collided, the vermilion bird staff was like a startled cat. It quickly wilted and became as obedient as a child. Clatter. With a clear sound, the vermilion bird staff retracted its aura and fell to the ground. Chapter 1667. Wang Yu and the rest of Xuanzhen were not surprised at all by this scene. In Rebirth, equipment sets would have some interactive Easter eggs. Since they were both part of the 10 great divine weapons, it was normal for them to have such interactions. However, what surprised everyone was that even though they were both part of the 10 great divine weapons, the god-vanquishing bow was actually so domineering. Just its aura alone was enough to subdue the vermilion bird staff, which was also a weapon of the same level. As expected of the 10 great divine weapons, after forging the god-vanquishing bow, Wang Yu had originally planned to use it to upgrade the martial scholar's sai. Although the martial scholar size attribute was far inferior to the god-vanquishing bow, this weapon had an extremely overpowered attribute, devour and assimilate. Therefore, if Wang Yu used the god-vanquishing bow to upgrade the martial scholar's sai, his glove would have an additional form of a bow. Players could only use 2 weapons in battle. Fusing the glove with the bow would obviously be much more convenient. However, Wang Yu's glove could not be casually upgraded. It required a large number of smelting stones. Due to the system update, there were basically no players in the game anymore. It was not very realistic to farm smelting stones now, so Wang Yu could only go offline first. After all, the equipment had already been forged. Even if the update lowered the forging success rate, Wang Yu was not afraid. At most, he would not fuse it. He could just use the bow as a standalone weapon. After logging out of the game, Wang Yu went to accompany his wife. Although they lived under the same roof, because they played games every day, the couple rarely saw each other. How could they not have a child at such a young age? The Wang family was huge, and the eldest son still had to carry on the family line. 10 minutes later, the emergency update for Rebirth began. At the same time, in a certain villa in Tianhai City, a middle-aged man came out of the gaming cabin. Although this middle-aged man was not as tall and sturdy as Wang Yu, he was still tall and straight. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes, and his every movement carried a hint of leadership. If Wang Yu was here, he would definitely be familiar with this guy. Wasn't this guy Blood Red War Flag? The guild leader of a major guild sure was rich. His gaming equipment was actually a professional competition gaming cabin. Blood Red War Flag got out of the game capsule, planning to wash up and then go out for a walk. After all, he was a gaming geek. The only time he could rest was when the game was updated. But at this moment, Blood Red War Flag's phone rang. Who was it at this time? Blood Red War Flag picked up his phone in confusion. When he saw the caller ID, his expression changed. Sigh, I knew this prodigal would find trouble with me. Blood Red War Flag sighed and thought for a moment. In the end, he pressed the answer button and asked calmly, Boss, are you looking for me? At this time, a heavy voice came from the other side of the phone. I heard that the game has been updated. It's rare to have a day off. Bring Shura and the others to my place. Let's have a meal together. Hearing their words, Blood Red War Flag smiled bitterly and curled its lips. As the saying went, a night owl would not come without a reason. Blood Red War Flag had been a guild leader for many years. Although he was not as smart as Wuji, he was definitely not stupid. He naturally understood that the boss would not invite him for a meal for no reason, especially since he had some unpleasantness with the boss's son today. This meal would probably not be too good, but so what? Since the boss was looking for him, Blood Red War Flag had no choice but to go. So Blood Red War Flag washed his face and walked out of the bedroom. One by one, he called the guys in the other bedrooms. People who liked to play games were basically homebodies and had a phobia of going out. Blood Red Shura was an honest guy. He was very dissatisfied with Blood Red War Flag forcefully dragging him and the others out of the house. He kept muttering along the way, What are you doing, boss? The system update doesn't even let us rest. The boss is treating you to a meal, so why did he call us? We're not even close to him. You think I wanted to call you? Blood Red War Flag said unhappily. The boss specifically asked you guys to come along. He asked us to come along. Blood Knight rubbed his chin and said excitedly, I know, it must be about 1,000 miles. As the big brothers, it's only right for us to get to know our new brothers. Blood Knight was quite optimistic. He thought that the boss wanted them to get to know 1,000 miles better. Everyone knew about 1,000 miles' background. As seniors in the guild, it was necessary for them to form a good rapport with this young master as soon as possible. After all, 1,000 miles was the young master of the guild. In the future, they would have to assist 1,000 miles. Speaking of this, it was not too late for Blood Knight to ask his best friend, Wind Whisper, what do you think? Blood Whisper Wind Whisper did not answer Blood Knight's question. Instead, he smiled faintly and remained silent. A truly smart person would always listen, observe, and use their brains more. Looking at Blood Red War Flag's expression, Blood Whisper Wind Whisper knew that this matter would not be so simple. Blood Red War Flag's residence was not far from the boss's house. Very quickly, they arrived at the boss's house. His boss, 10,000 Miles Crimson, it's an MMORPG. Let's talk about the MMORPG ID. Had been waiting for him at home for a long time. 1,000 Miles was a middle-aged man in his 50s or 60s. Although he was not a professional gamer, he liked it, which was why he had invested in Blood Alliance. In reality, the Blood Alliance was just a playful investment for 10,000 Miles. After all these years, apart from spending money to manage the pro team, he didn't really care about anything else. It was all Blood Red War Flag's operations, so 10,000 Miles was very confident. This was the first time in a few years that 1,000 Miles had invited Blood Red War Flag to his house for a meal. The dining table was filled with exquisite delicacies. 10,000 Miles sat at the head of the table, while 1,000 Miles sat quietly beside him. On the other side of the table, there were a few young men who were around the same age as 1,000 Miles. Blood Red War Flag and the others thought that they were the only ones invited. After seeing the few unfamiliar young people at the table, they could not help but be stunned. At this time, 1,000 Miles stood up unhurriedly and pointed to the seats beside him. "This is a family banquet. Everyone please sit." Blood Red War Flag and the others did not stand on ceremony. After casually sizing up the few young people, they casually pulled out the seats and sat down. Chapter 1668. Putting aside the character of Blood Red War Flag, they were still very polite. Although the kid's tone was full of disdain, Blood Red War Flag was too embarrassed to act up in front of the boss. Instead, he nodded politely and said, "I am Blood Red War Flag. May I know who you are?" Before that person could answer, 1,000 Miles Blood said, "This is Sudden Golden Light, my friend." "Hello." Blood Red War Flag stood up and extended his hand across the table to shake Sudden Golden Light's hand. Hee. Unexpectedly, Sudden Golden Light sneered, picked up the wine glass in front of him, and looked elsewhere. He did not seem to care about Blood Red War Flag at all. "What do you mean?" As the guild leader of a guild, Blood Red War Flag was no young brat. Seeing the sudden appearance of the Golden Light, Blood Red War Flag only smiled awkwardly and retracted his hand. However, the Blood Azura beside Blood Red War Flag was enraged. Blood Red Shura had always been straightforward. As an old subordinate of Blood Red War Flag, their relationship had always been very close. Now that his boss was being treated like this, it was equivalent to him being treated the same way. Blood Red Shura naturally could not hold back. "Shura, sit down." Blood Red Shura was insensible, but Blood Red War Flag was not. They were in the boss's house. If they really quarreled, they would not be giving face to the boss. Blood Red War Flag pulled Blood Red Shura back to his seat, and then said 1,000 Miles Blood, "Sorry, Shura's temper has always been like this, I know." 1,000 Miles Blood Red smiled and said, "It's normal for young people to be energetic. Only when you are energetic will you be motivated. If you don't have the motivation, you will quickly become old." Blood Red War Flag could not help but frown when it heard Blood Red Miles. Blood Red War Flag was also experienced. Of course, he could tell that there was a hidden meaning in 1,000 Miles Blood Red's words. Blood Red War Flag thought for a moment and said, "I don't quite understand what you mean." "Haha, you worry too much." Blood Red War Flag smiled and waved his hand. "I heard that our Blood Alliance has encountered some trouble recently." "No." Blood Red War Flag said with a blank face, "The guild is quite good. No one dares to provoke us." "Really?" 10,000 Miles Blood said, "I heard that the guild with the most authority in Yu Huicheng is in our Blood Alliance." This Blood Red War Flag was startled, but our Blood Alliance is still the biggest guild. "The largest guild?" Sigh. 10,000 Miles Crimson sighed and said, "War Flag, it looks like you're getting old. You don't even have the right to speak. How can you claim to be the biggest guild? You must be motivated when you do things." Blood Red War Flag was rendered speechless by 10,000 Miles' words. "Boss, I'm afraid you've heard someone say something bad." Blood Red War Flag said, "Although our Blood Alliance doesn't have the most authority in Yu Huicheng, Our development is definitely the smoothest. Moreover, our Blood Alliance has a main city. There's so many big guilds in the game, but not many have main cities. I know. 10,000 Miles Blood said with a smile. But I heard that our main city is also a subsidiary city of Yuhui-Chung. This, Blood Red War Flag said with some embarrassment. Sometimes, in order to develop a guild, we have to compromise on some things. You make it sound so easy. At this moment, 10,000 Miles Blood, who had been silent, suddenly said, "Compromise? Our Blood Alliance has tens of thousands of people, and we have to compromise with a small guild with less than 20 people. Don't you think it's funny? They aren't a normal small guild." Blood Red War Flag said seriously, "We can't use common sense to understand Xuanjin." Oh, 10,000 Miles Blood raised his eyebrows in doubt. We can't use common sense to understand them. Even if we have tens of thousands of people, we shouldn't be afraid of a dozen people. With 10,000 Miles Blood Red's question, Blood Red War Flag was completely speechless. This was because Blood Red War Flag didn't know how to explain this. After all, the difference in numbers between Xuanjin and Blood Alliance was obvious. Even if the dozen people in Xuanjin were all superhumans, there was no reason for tens of thousands of people to be helpless. In this situation, it would be better if they didn't explain. Once they did, it would be even more embarrassing. Although it was a fact that they couldn't deal with Xuanjin, Blood Red War Flag couldn't tell the truth. Otherwise, if they directly said that they couldn't deal with a dozen people with tens of thousands of people, wouldn't that be shameless? First of all, attitude was a big problem. This was accepting their fate. Even Blood Red War Flag couldn't believe such words. So how could they convince others? Then, boss, what do you think we should do? Blood Red War Flag hesitated for a while and finally decided to listen to the boss. I heard that there are 2 blacksmiths in Xuanjin. 10,000 Miles Blood Red squinted his eyes and said, "The right to speak is meaningless. You just need to get these 2 blacksmiths to join our Blood Alliance." Boss, this. Blood Red War Flag heard this, and his expression instantly changed. Other people might not know who the blacksmiths in Xuanjin were, but how could Blood Red War Flag not know? Chopper 345 wasn't familiar with Blood Red War Flag, but Wang Yu was the true #1 expert in Xuanjin. Poach Wang Yu to Blood Alliance? Not to mention how low the success rate was, it was obvious that they were going to start a war with Xuanjin. Blood Red War Flag spent a lot of effort to maintain the relationship between the 2 guilds. Now that they were stabbing Xuanjin in the back, how was Blood Red War Flag going to survive in the future? With Old Dog Wuji's skill, Blood Alliance wouldn't be able to live in peace anymore. How long had it been since Heavenly Sword was kicked out of Yuhui-Chung? Blood Red War Flag was still traumatized. What's wrong? I gave you a chance, and you're not going to use it? 10,000 Miles Blood Red's expression slightly changed, and his smile disappeared. No. Blood Red War Flag saw that 10,000 Miles Blood Red's tone was unfriendly and hurriedly said, "I think you should reconsider this matter. After all, I'm in charge of this part of the game. I think I have more experience." Oh, hearing Blood Red War Flag's words, 10,000 Miles Blood Red started to ponder. Indeed, 10,000 Miles Blood Red was just the boss behind the scenes. Sponsoring a guild was just for fun. As for managing a guild, he was really a layman. If he forcefully interfered with Blood Alliance's matters, wouldn't he be a layman commanding experts? With 10,000 Miles Blood Red's business being so big, he naturally knew the consequences of a layman commanding experts. But just as 10,000 Miles Blood Red was hesitating, 10,000 Miles Blood Red suddenly shouted, "See? I told you that Blood Red War Flag is a traitor. You didn't believe me." Chapter 1669. Don't play dumb with me. Seeing Blood Red War Flag's expression, Blood Red 1,000 Miles said aggressively, "Then tell me, why is it that the Blood Red Alliance has tens of thousands of people but doesn't dare to offend a Quanjun sect with only a dozen people? Why does our main city have to become Xuanjin's subsidiary city? Why are you Huicheng, 2 Grandmaster blacksmiths, in Xuanjin?" This, Blood Red War Flag was rendered speechless by Blood Red War Flag's interrogation. Logically speaking, Blood Red War Flag was more depressed than anyone else. But what could they do? If Chuanjin was easier to deal with, Blood Red War Flag wouldn't be in such a state. What's wrong? Speechless? Thousand Miles Crimson said arrogantly, "You might be able to hide your thoughts from others, but you can't hide them from me." The reason why a small guild like the Quanjin sect was able to rise to its current position and even become the city lord of Afterglow City is because you've been protecting them. I'm sure they've given you a lot of benefits. It had to be said that Thousand Miles Crimson wasn't a good person, but he had a lot of bad intentions. Now that he said it like that, the whole thing seemed to make sense. If it weren't for the fact that he had been dealing with the Quanjin sect for many years, even a smart person like Blood Wind Whisper would have been led astray. As for a brainless guy like Blood Red Azura, he looked at Blood Red War Flag in surprise and said, "No way, boss. Is what he said true?" Bullsh asterisk T. Blood Red War Flag was also a hot-tempered person. Blood Alliance was raised by Blood Red War Flag, and no one had deeper feelings for Blood Alliance than Blood Red War Flag. If it wasn't for Blood Alliance's development, why would Blood Red War Flag swallow their anger towards Chuanjin? They had tens of thousands of subordinates. If they fought, they would just fight to the death and both sides would suffer. They wouldn't be laughed at like this. But now, they were being slandered as a traitor. No matter how hard Blood Red War Flag tried to suppress their anger, it was useless. They stood up and pointed at Thousand Miles angrily. "I do things in an open and above-board manner. I never do such dirty things. It's up to you whether you want to believe it or not. At most, I'll let you be the guild leader. War Flag, don't be angry." Seeing that Blood Red War Flag was on fire, 10,000 Miles hurriedly comforted it. "He's just a child. He doesn't know any better. I know you won't do such a thing. After all, such a thing is meaningless to you. Boss, you're an understanding person." Blood Red War Flag finally calmed down after hearing what Bloody Miles said. However, 10,000 Miles Crimson continued. "But everyone starts guilds to earn money. There's such a big piece of meat right in front of your mouth. If you don't take it, I'll be jealous. Boss, you don't have to feel troubled." Blood Red War Flag thought about it and said, "I've thought it through. There is no one managing Saga City. If you still trust me, I will go to Saga City to manage the guild there." Everyone was a part of the underworld, and no one was a complete idiot. The meaning behind Blood Red Miles' words was very clear. He was giving Blood Red War Flag two options. Either they destroyed the Chuanjin sect, or they handed over the guild to someone with ambition to manage it. Provoking Chuanjin was no different from poking a hornet's nest. As long as Blood Red War Flag was not stupid, they would not do such a dangerous thing. Of course, they had been friends for so many years, and many things needed to be considered. 10,000 Miles Crimson War Flag had already given Blood Red War Flag enough face, so Blood Red War Flag naturally had to accept it. Rather than being forced to leave by the boss, it was better to volunteer. At least that way, it would be easier for everyone. Ha ha ha. As expected, seeing that Blood Red War Flag was tactful enough to hand over the control of Blood Alliance in Yu Huicheng, 10,000 Miles Crimson laughed and raised a wine glass in his hand. "War Flag is indeed my right-hand man. No matter where you go, I will be at ease. Don't worry. Even if you go to Saga City, you will still be the leader of Blood Alliance. I will even increase your salary by 10%. How about that?" "Thank you, boss." Blood Red War Flag curled his lips and raised his wine glass to 10,000 Miles Crimson's. What did it mean to rise in the open but fall in the dark? This was it. Blood Alliance's foundation was in Yu Huicheng. Once Blood Red War Flag left, it was the same as losing their power. They would also be a figurehead. Without any power, what was the point of having the leader's title? 10,000 Miles Crimson was an old fox in the business world. Blood Red War Flag was just a gamer. In terms of shrewdness, they were much worse than 10,000 Miles Crimson. After drinking a glass of wine, 10,000 Miles Crimson continued. "Since War Flag has requested to go to Saga City, then from tomorrow onwards, 10,000 Miles Crimson will take over Yu Huicheng's guild. Does anyone have any objections?" No. The others quickly shook their heads. Bloodwind Whisper and Blood Dark Knight were both smart people. They knew who they could offend and who they couldn't. Although they couldn't stand 10,000 Miles Crimson's actions, things had already reached this point. Even if they had any objections, it would be useless. It might even affect themselves. As a person, it was important to stay out of trouble. As for Blood Shura, this idiot didn't understand what was going on. Seeing everyone shake their heads, he shook his head as well. As expected of the backbone of Blood Alliance, 10,000 Miles Crimson said with a smile, "In the future, 10,000 Miles Crimson will be managing the guild in Yuhuichen. Please support me." Chapter 1670. What's this? Seeing the small box in Bloody Miles's hand, Bloody Wind Whisper was confused. Although Bloody Wind Whisper was a smart person, he could not relate this small box to fighting against Chuanjin. After all, no matter how powerful Chuanjin was, it was still in the game. What use could an item in real life do? Could it be that items in real life could be brought into the game? It couldn't be. This was not a fantasy novel. Not only Bloody Wind Whisper, but Bloody War Flag and Bloody Azura were also confused when they saw the small box in Bloody Miles's hand. Seeing that everyone was behaving like they had never seen the world before, Bloody Miles chuckled and gently touched the switch on the box. Clack! After the small box opened, a row of chips the size of a fingernail was revealed, emitting a blue glow. After that, Bloody Miles took out a chip and held it in front of everyone, saying calmly, "See this? With this, those fellows from the Quanjin sect are nothing." This Bloody Wind Whisper was very smart. After hearing Bloody Miles's words, he was slightly shocked and could not help but exclaim, "Could this be ZM1 Smart Chip?" Bloody Miles smiled and introduced, "This is the latest technological product of Country A. As long as this chip is implanted into the brain, it can increase the activity of the implanted user's brain, allowing the implanted user's reflexes to reach the limit. This is a cheat." The moment Thousand Miles said this, the blood-red war flag involuntarily cried out. As everyone knew, full simulation online games were not controlled by the mouse and keyboard. The game was 100% controlled by the mind. As such, the player's reflexes were very important. This ZM1 chip could greatly increase the player's reflexes. Wasn't this just a cheat that increased the speed of the player? Wrong. Bloody Miles waved his hand and said this thing is legal. It's fundamentally different from a cheat. Indeed, a cheat was a software that relied on some illegal programs to modify the game's data to strengthen the game's character. On the other hand, the ZM1 Smart Chip fundamentally increased the player's ability. Although they both relied on external forces to increase the player's attributes, in theory, the ZM1 chip was not a cheat. Using gaming slang to explain it in layman's terms, cheats were basically equivalent to equipment, which was an external power. Chips, on the other hand, belonged to the player's own attributes and had nothing to do with the equipment. Therefore, this kind of thing could not be detected by the game company, and even if it was detected, it would be useless. After all, from a certain perspective, the AI chip was equivalent to Wang Yu's Kung Fu. The gaming company could control the attributes of the characters in the game, but could they control the strength of the players in real life? With this thing, wouldn't players be invincible in the real world? The country doesn't care? The Bloody Azura was speechless after hearing the Bloody Miles explanation. Although the Crimson Shura was brainless, it still knew the rules. If what the Crimson Thousand Miles said was true, this chip was basically equivalent to Captain America's enhancement drug. This kind of thing would definitely be controlled by the country. You worry too much. The Thousand Miles Crimson laughed and said, "This thing only increases a person's reaction speed. It won't strengthen your physical body. Moreover, this chip only increases a person's reaction speed to the maximum. It doesn't directly change your thinking ability." I see. The Bloody Azura finally understood after hearing the Thousand Miles Crimson Thousand Miles explanation. A person's reaction speed was not always at its peak. Instead, it would change according to the environment. Only in times of extreme danger would a person's reaction speed reach its peak. Under normal circumstances, it would definitely not reach this peak. The ability of this chip was to maintain the target's reaction speed at its peak. It would not strengthen the person's thinking ability or body. In other words, it maintained a person's reaction speed at its peak. This peak level was determined by the target itself. Moreover, this ability only maintained the brain's thinking ability and would not affect the body's functions. In other words, even if the implanted person could clearly see the trajectory of the bullet, their body's functions would still not be able to reach the speed of dodging the bullet. Therefore, this so-called ZM1 smart chip was actually a custom-made cheat for the game Rebirth. It was a built-in cheat for the player's body. After all, the attributes of the player's character in the game were far superior to those in real life. The ZM1 chip could only be used to its greatest effect when combined with the in-game character. How is it? Thousand Miles Crimson said proudly, "It wasn't easy for me to get this through my connections. It's something that only foreign pro players can get their hands on. With this chip, who would be afraid of Chuanjin's fake teachings?" You're right, Bloody Wind Whisperer agreed upon hearing that. What do you mean by there are policies and countermeasures? Rebirth was a full-system simulation online game. In a truest sense, it had achieved full network monitoring. Cheats had never been heard of since the launch of Rebirth. Over the past half a year, players had even forgotten that there was something called cheating in online games. But who would have thought that the thinking of cheaters would always keep up with the times and could even develop support chips under such circumstances? It seemed that there was still a long way to go to create a harmonious network environment. Thinking of this, the Blood Red War Flag's expression turned solemn. Of course, Blood Red War Flag, Bloodwind Whisperer, and the others were not that opposed to cheats. They had all been playing online games for so many years, and they were the guild leaders of major guilds. Who would dare to say that they did not have a dark history? They could not just pull up their pants and scold people for running naked, right? The reason why Blood Red War Flag had such an expression was because it was worried for the people from the Quanjin sect. Yu Huicheng was not big, and the two guilds often met each other. Their relationship was not bad. The reason why Blood Alliance could develop so well and even have an independent main city was because of Chuanjin. Chuanjin was strong, but no matter how strong they were still people who played the game. If they had to face cheats, it was obvious what would happen to them. Since ancient times, Blood Red War Flag had never heard of any normal player being able to beat a god. No matter what, Blood Red War Flag was not the kind of ungrateful person. Blood Red War Flag really wanted to make friends with these people from the Quanjin sect, but the current situation really made Blood Red War Flag a little embarrassed. Secretly leak information? After all, Blood Red War Flag was a member of Blood Alliance. Of course, they would not do such a thing. Sit back and do nothing? Blood Red War Flag suddenly felt that they were being immoral. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.